Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV programming is supported by Revolutionary Clinics in Massachusetts, the #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 accounting solution for the cannabis industry. And by TCP's Style Lighting Grow Kit, all you need to grow.
Welcome back to Green Rush Live. I'm going to be your host today. I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm with the Talking Hedge podcast. With me is Christopher Smith to co-host for the next 2 hours. Christopher, how are you?
Great, Josh. Great to see you. How you doing?
Good. Happy Friday. We got a lot to talk about. We got a couple amazing guests to run down some news that just popped off last night, as a matter of fact. So running through our guests, we have Gretchen Gailey. She's of Panoptic Strategies, a DC-based cannabis law firm. She's with us. I believe she's at the airport. Really appreciate you being with us, Gretchen.
Well, I'm actually a PR firm, not law. I'm no lawyer. I just know a bunch of lawyers.
All right. Sorry about that. David O'Brien is also with us, head of the Massachusetts Cannabis Business Association. We're going to talk about the biggest deal that the host security agreement in Massachusetts, now under the Cannabis Control Commission's authority. There's been some shakedowns and bribery schemes in Massachusetts. We're going to get to all of that coming up. David, thanks for being with us at Green Rush Live.
Thanks, Josh. I'm not sure you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Sweet.
Last but not least, in the backyard of where I'm at here in the Pacific Northwest, I believe, Bruce Barcott. He is a senior editor at Leafly. Bruce, thanks for being back with us at Green Rush Live.
Sure. Thanks. Good to be here.
Appreciate it. So, David, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about what happened last night and the significance of really the first news we've seen in about half a decade.
Yeah. So for the first time in 5 years, the legislature has advanced a somewhat comprehensive package on some of the reforms that we've needed sorely for the cannabis industry to flourish. You referenced the host community agreements. They also advanced social equity loan funding and social consumption, which is our last license that we're implementing here in Massachusetts. And not in this bill, but we're hoping will come as 280E reform as it relates to state tax collection. So 2 of those items, actually 3 of those items, have something to do with financing and or saving companies money. So we're pretty excited about it.
Tell us a little bit more about what are the details of it? I mean, how is that going to influence the capital coming in and or save capital that's already there?
Yeah, so your reference of calling it a shakedown, I think people call us mean when we say that against municipalities, but you're exactly right. It is a shakedown of epic proportions. Municipalities have been charging up to 3% of gross revenue, and it's appropriately called gross because they take money out of the pockets of cannabis entrepreneurs who are trying to run a business, and they don't provide receipts for it. So we've been advocating for years that not only would the legislature tighten that up and give the Cannabis Control Commission oversight, but that municipalities fess up to the fact that they've been basically pocketing money for unsubstantiated impact fees and costs that don't occur at the local level. There's a reason why the Northampton mayor back in January of 2021 said, you know what, we're not going to charge this anymore because there are no fees. The city of Amesbury with a new mayor said there are no fees, we're not going to charge for it. There's a reason why there's 2 lawsuits, one in Haverhill, one in Gloucester, saying, you know what, we're not standing for this anymore. So municipalities are starting to get the message, but it's probably going to take one of those lawsuits to be victorious to send a shockwave through the industry. On the social equity loan funding, we're a little late to that argument for the industry. I know New York is attempting to do a $200 million loan fund just for retail for social equity. The first batch of funding, based on it being a percentage of excise tax collected, will be about $18 million in Massachusetts. It'll be for all license types, not just retail, so that's exciting. 280 is not in this bill, as I said, but that's a big savings to the industry, even if we can just decouple it for state tax collection.
Mm-hmm. Gretchen, last week we heard a lot from DC with regards to the MORE Act. What are they saying right now with regards to what we're seeing in Massachusetts?
Well, I have not heard much coming up about, Massachusetts down here in DC. For us, it's the end of the week and everyone's just happy taking their victory lap on the MORE Act. So things come to Washington a bit slower than they get done in the States. We shall see.
How is the MORE Act going to impact a state like Massachusetts? What's the excitement and buzz going around in DC?
Well, there's a lot of excitement and buzz from advocates that this is passed. I wouldn't say there's a lot of excitement, though, that it's going to go much further. We don't expect to see much support on the Senate floor. And with the CAOA still expected from Senator Schumer, Wyden, Booker coming up, they keep telling us the end of April. We shall see if that's true. But with that looming ahead, I don't see any other piece of cannabis legislation hitting the Senate floor anytime soon before that does. So a lot really hinges on that. But people have compared the MORE Act and the CAOA, saying that they're fairly similar. And since the MORE Act didn't garner much bipartisan support, it only had 3 Republican votes on the House floor, I wouldn't expect you to see much Republican support for either piece of legislation in the Senate.
Interesting. There's going to be a few bills coming up. I think Christopher's got a whole list of that we're going to be talking to in the next segment. But Bruce, with Massachusetts having the first news in 5 years, is there any significance that you've seen or read about, or that you will be writing about in Leaf with what's happening on the East Coast?
Yeah, actually, it's quite significant because this is one of I think the few states that has come back to take another bite at the apple. Too many states are like my home state of Washington, well, our home state here of Washington, where once legalization is passed, the legislature has been pretty slow to pick up any sort of smaller reforms that are wanted or needed. Here in Washington state, we passed legalization without allowing home grow of any kind. I mean, I guess medical patients can grow, but others can't. And we've been trying to get that passed through the legislature every year since, to no avail. There's just little interest on the part of legislators, and they're like, "Well, didn't we deal with that already? We have other things to do." But also, I think I think from a national perspective, or at least for those of us on the East Coast, we're pretty impressed that Massachusetts is taking up and dealing with these host community agreements. They were an interesting pilot project when y'all passed legalization, but I mean, some of the things that have come out since, especially with the Haverhill details. We ran a story last year, and this came out. I think the details came out thanks to Shalene Title, the former commissioner there, and Haverhill was charging, what they charged the 3 cannabis businesses in town $1.3 million and claimed impact fees, and included training for officers to recognize marijuana impairment, a one-time $17,000 cost for uniforms, weapons, holsters, and other personal gear for their officers, and 6 additional officers during the day and night shifts to cover cannabis shops. And there are 3 cannabis shops. They're just stores. They don't require extra policing. I mean, it was sort of ridiculous on its face. And I think, that was a real shock to the rest of us around the country. But the fact that the legislature in Massachusetts is addressing it, good on you. I'm really impressed.
It is pretty significant to have somebody go after something 5 years. Bruce, you're probably more than aware of the Class C felony on maintaining and operating a marijuana lounge that's been around for 5 or 6 years. And naively, I thought that would come and go in Washington state, and it's been around and they haven't even addressed it. And yet just recently they made a move to remove the word marijuana. So they're taking time for the industry, but it's just kind of at their own pace. Christopher, do you have any opinions about why they would do this now? Why they would wait, 5 years and then just kind of decide on the timing of it all?
It's very tough to say. I think that Gretchen and I will discuss many times. There goes my camera going sideways. Sorry. About but the priority of cannabis versus the priorities of all the other sort of world concerning events. and whether or not cannabis is as a high priority for others, and including legislators, as it is for us. So it may be a factor of that they just sort of got around to it 5 years later because they actually didn't really put it on a priority in any particular year. It seems to me that that happens quite a bit. It certainly happens at the very top levels. We talk about Joe Biden all the time. He doesn't care enough. He doesn't care enough. But then he will always say, well, I've got COVID, I've got Ukraine, I've got inflation, I've got these other major issues. Cannabis, settle down. So I think it may be a little bit of the relative value of where we fit in the universe of things.
Mm-hmm. David, what are the downstream effects to this? I'm thinking of capital and what just happened in New York, the $250 million with Scott's coming in. Is this going to put more of a spotlight on Massachusetts now that it's seeing more attention to the industry, or is this just going to hit the newswire and go away?
Yeah, I think on the social equity loan fund, I think that's exciting. I had a legislator ask me 2 months ago, is it too late for this? I said, well, we've got at that time 200 open retail dispensaries. You tell me. I mean, are we going to do the next 50 and make them all social equity? Probably not. I think access to capital has been a barrier to entry for everybody in the space, particularly social equity and economic empowerment applicant pools, which we call them in Massachusetts. Too often Black and brown communities that were harmed by the war on drugs. So we welcome the fund. We've been advocating with the Cannabis Control Commission for as long as we've been in existence, which is December of 2017, that we need this kind of funding. It's taken this long, in part, I think, because to Christopher's point, we've been beating the drum, but there's not a big burning urge in legislative circles to vote on cannabis more than once every 5 years in Massachusetts as it occurs. So we're excited about the funding. We're excited about the relief that may be coming to the industry on the two pieces of legislation. So we continue to push forward. The frustrating part about the municipalities, to the point of sort of reading what the Haverhill lawsuit has had, it's just been a lack of transparency and blatant overreach by municipalities. And, they've been getting away with it. And we can change this law. That's not going to fix it. It's going to take a win in court to get operators to sort of feel their oats about this and save the money that they've been paying. It's been a blank check. It's just frustrating.
Well, yeah, efficiencies are one thing, but trying to get officials to do the right thing is another. Bruce, have you written about any of the issues and schemes in Massachusetts? The former Fall River mayor was in jail for accepting payments, for example.
As a lifelong journalist, a juicy story like that, it pained me not to be able to cover that pretty extensively. But no, I didn't cover the Fall River case much. We did keep an eye on it here. But to one of David's points earlier was that question of is it too little, too late? And I think I'm looking at Massachusetts as a state of 7 million people, 200 stores, and I'm living in a state of roughly 7 million people with 600 stores. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of, boy, you got a lot of stores that there's still a lot of room to open. There are a lot of market to grow. So it's interesting to see different states at different spots on the spectrum in terms of maturing markets and everything. So 200 stores, there's plenty of room for more entrepreneurs in there.
Mm-hmm. Gretchen, is it too little, too late? We always hear about promises made by politicians, and then we seem to wait for things to happen, especially in the cannabis industry. Is it too little, too late for some of the bills that have recently passed the House or might pass either the Senate or the House?
I'd say absolutely not. I think, cannabis is coming into its prime in the federal legislature. I mean, if you look at it in the past, they weren't even considering cannabis bills in recent years. So it's not as if, we missed the boat. They weren't even getting on the boat before. So finally, they're actually addressing some of these concerns and looking at them. I think another thing, to the point of too little, too late, I don't think there's too little, too late at all when it comes to the Northeast. These are new markets that are just coming online. cannabis has not been ingrained in the hearts and souls of, the Northeast like it is in California and out West, when you guys have had it for years, since the 90s, really. I mean, of course we've had it, but not to the extent that it's a part of the culture, like I would say that is in California. So for like new markets like New Jersey, Massachusetts, which has been up and running a good bit better than others, New York coming online, hopefully Pennsylvania will someday figure out their legislature and get their asses moving, but that's neither here nor there. But it's a major population base in the Northeast. And so I think that's what's really starting to help the folks in Washington bring cannabis more into their focus, is now it's hitting home more. Now they're seeing it with a lot more of their constituents, and they see this a lot more on the East Coast. I think it just rings true to them a bit more than, how the far and away California. It's, everyone looks at La La Land, especially from Washington, and it's like, oh, those people out in California, they're all nuts. But when you see, no offense, but when you
flakes
see
and
it
nuts.
in our backyard,
Thank you very
all of a
much.
sudden,
Flakes and nuts. Thank you very much.
flakes and nuts who eat avocados.
That's-
I mean, the
that's
closest
right.
we get to avocado is guacamole for the Super Bowl. That's about it.
Avocado toast. Thank you very much.
So I think it's finally starting to hit home a lot more on the East Coast, and that's why you're going to start seeing some more traction. Do I think much is going to happen this year? No. I think maybe you'll see safe banking. Maybe the HOPE Act coupled with safe banking can get through. I think that's all you're going to see on the federal side. But the conversation has started, and I think it's going to keep coming in the coming years.
If I might add something, Josh, I agree with Gretchen almost on most things, even though you might not think so, Gretchen, but I really do actually. But one of the things I think that's helping us push this conversation, and it's sort of the business that all of us are in really, which is bringing the stories of cannabis out of the context of the stoner culture of California and the Pineapple Express and the Cheech and Chong and all that, pulling it away from that and making sure that it's centered on normal people's actual experience, whether it's medicinal or whether it's used for a mental health condition or a chronic pain where 30% of Americans suffer from it. Like putting it in the mainstream and really making it much more normalized is really helping the cause. And as much as we can do that, I think that it helps hopefully push the ball down the field in Washington and the state legislatures as well.
Yeah, picking up on that, I think that the coming of retail stores in New Jersey and then New York is really going to help. But also it's going to be fascinating to see what happens when Virginia opens like that. And I mean, that is not just DC's backyard, that's DC, right?
Sure.
So it'll be really interesting to see what effect those eastern states, I mean, Massachusetts already made great inroads there, but then coming in with New Jersey, New York, and then, Virginia right there in DC will be interesting to watch and to see how many votes eventually turn when those states, open their stores.
Well, and to Bruce's point, Virginia is a very conservative state. I mean, other than the suburbs of Washington, D.C., it's a highly conservative state. So to see how they embrace cannabis is definitely going to be interesting. And some of the early dispensaries we've seen open have been down around the Virginia Beach area, around Norfolk, where all the military is based. Mm-hmm. And truly for veterans and for our war fighters who are looking for relief, cannabis has really been making a strong argument. And a lot of, especially on the right side of the aisle, that's where they're getting on board with this argument. So it should be interesting to see how they take it up, because Virginia is definitely going to take a much more conservative approach to it, but they're ready to get into this.
Great point.
What do the people of Massachusetts have to look forward to when the Massachusetts adult use market reaches its maturity? What's that going to look like? Is it fairly conservative right now, like Arizona, that likes vape pens but not pre-rolls? We're seeing California 40% flower. What is the market share? What do people enjoy in the Massachusetts market? I'm wondering, both from a consumer standpoint as well as businesses and investors that are looking to come into the market, and where they might settle out.
That to me.
Sure, David, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, flower rules still. Edibles and vapes not far behind. I think as the market matures, we're starting to see prices start to come down a little bit for the consumer. So now you're starting to see some operators say, uh-oh, was thinking these high prices would last forever, and my price per pound is at a certain point, and I didn't plan for this. So that offering, we're a pretty wide offering of all types of products. I think there isn't, I don't think there's much that we're not offering here. So that is exciting for the consumer. It's exciting for the operator to be able to offer that, but we're starting to see some price drops now with more and more cultivation and manufacturing hitting the market to provide to those 207 stores open. But there's right behind that, there's another, I think, almost 200, 180 stores that are in the queue to open. And then there's another, I think, twice as much cultivation in the pipeline that could open. So when all that hits the market, prices are going to drop.
Mm-hmm.
And Massachusetts also enjoys being in the close proximity to New York, which is yet to put one reg together. We've seen from when legislation generally passes, it takes about 2 years for a market to get up and running. So Massachusetts is still going to be able to play off of New York, still trying to get their act together. This past summer, I went up to the Berkshires to check it out. And, you know, my friend was telling me so much about the Berkshire cannabis scene. I'm like, okay. And so I went up there to see it. And she said they're trying to become the Humboldt of the East Coast. I'm like, all right, well, I think you guys got a little ways to go. But speaking to a dispensary owner there, he's in a town, I think it was Lenox, Massachusetts. He said population 6,000. He's like, average on week, I see about 7,000 customers coming through the doors during tourism season. Just people are piling through there left and right. So I think they're going to do just fine.
New York and Connecticut are frequent customers to Western Mass and the Berkshires for sure.
One of the things that we find, you know, when we do our annual jobs report at Leafly, we look at sales in every state and we look at how that's broken down into different product categories. And I remember 6 years ago when there was a lot of assumption about, with the maturing of markets, that you would see sales of flower drop pretty precipitously as edibles and other form factors like, you know, vape pens and things like that came into the market. And I've been personally like really surprised at how at the staying power of flower, pre-rolls, but it is still just consistently 50% of sales. Just about every state. I mean, even Colorado, it's you know, the pure form of cannabis still kind of rules. It's been amazing how it's stayed in there, even as these more interesting form factors come in. And I think we've seen, you know, you see a more acceptance of things like edibles among non-regular cannabis consumers, but among regular cannabis consumers, they love their flower.
I think you're seeing those trends, Bruce, because typically, you know, if somebody enjoys, you know, a couple of beers on their Saturday night to relax, they're not all of a sudden switching over to cannabis because, yay, cannabis is legal. Yeah. I think you're seeing the purists and the folks who've always consumed now turning to the legal market and seeing what they can adopt. The folks who are trying the newer things like edibles and vapes and tinctures, those are the younger folks who are a little more adventurous. But I think really what we're seeing is not an influx of, you know, new consumers. It's an influx of consumers just coming into the legal market. And those are the folks who are used to flower and love it dearly.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, Gretchen. It's always occurred to me that the people have been using it all along. Now they're just sort of coming out into the light. And so when we even talk about statistical analysis or surveys about how many people used cannabis back in, you know, such and such a day versus today, and there's increase in users, I've always thought it's really only an increase in people admitting that they use, but they've been using it all along. It's probably, I'll bet you in reality, it's a very steady number.
I remember talking to a few alcohol lobbyists a couple years ago. Some report came out, some data that said that, you know, alcohol sales had seen a 15% drop because of cannabis. And these people are losing their minds and they're calling their lobbyists trying to figure out what's going on. And basically we said back to them, well, did you see a 15% drop? And they're like, well, no. And we're like, then shut up. I'm like, there's bad studies out there all the time. Just because the study said it didn't make it true. Right. Yes, we've seen some impact, but not nearly the impact that people think is going to happen.
Right. Gretchen says, then shut up.
What about some advice for the Massachusetts market? Christopher, you're in California. They had medical marijuana in the mid 90s, and yet we're still seeing chaos. So for anybody who thinks that, once it goes adult use, then everything is over and that's the end of it, you can look at California and see the current chaos and understand that that's not really the case. So what advice do you have, having lived through that and seen it? It doesn't have to be good advice, by the way, but what advice do you have for the Massachusetts market and what they're going through right now?
A couple of things. Massachusetts market has always seemed to me, Massachusetts generally, has always seemed to me to be centered around its educational base. I mean, the Boston hub of Harvard, MIT, BU, BC, et cetera, all the way, across the state, all the way to Williams and Berkshires, and et cetera. So the educational quality and the educational value is so high. So whenever I see a conversation about medicinal marijuana, I always want to know, when is Harvard University going to demand cannabis be legalized, or at least access to medicinal cannabis, so that they can test it and find out what's inside and find out what's good for people. I'm just amazed that the medical community is not more active about this. They've been sort of sidelined. And if you look at Israel, if you look at other countries around the world that are now just eating our lunch in this way, I can't imagine that there's not more demand from the intellectual community to try to get a hold of cannabis and really understand it, number one. Number two, we have a huge problem in California right now, which has to do with licensing. We have an enormous amount of production. We have an enormous amount of growing capacity, and we have a very tiny amount of retail capacity. So we have this giant amount of product trying to fit into a very tiny pipeline. The reason it happened is because in California, the League of Cities came out strong and said, we're not going to take the sort of dictates from Sacramento on our city. We want our local control to rule, right? So something like 70% of the municipalities in California opted out of cannabis. And so we have all this production, and 70% of the cities and towns around California opted out, and so don't allow any retail. So we have a huge problem, right? We can't sell all that we create. Small farmers are getting crushed. Prices are going down. Tax revenues are going down. Everybody's in turmoil. So I think that the opt-out issue, I think, is really overblown by the local communities. I believe that what they don't understand is that if you have legal cannabis retail in your city, it is more likely that crime is going to go down, that teen use is going to go down. The argument is always about save the children, protect the children, and we don't want children to get at it. Well, if you don't want children to get at it, put a dispensary in the town, because that person who owns the dispensary probably put $1 million into the dispensary in terms of security and resources and staff and supplies, etc. There's probably $1 million in there. So they're not going to sell to underage people. They're not going to. The person that's going to sell to underage people and who's going to keep the kids at risk is the drug dealer, right? So if you don't have a dispensary in town, the drug dealer thrives. He gets to do whatever he wants. That's how your kids get a hold of it. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and this sort of legacy misunderstanding about the dangers of cannabis and how it's going to attack our communities and get into the children, all of that. And I think that our storytelling ability has to really meet the challenge and make sure that people understand that it's really the opposite. And I think that Massachusetts people are smart enough to understand that. And I hope they get it. And I hope they do it differently.
Yeah, we're watching that happen, Christopher. I mean, Massachusetts was by ballot. So 91 of our 351 cities and towns opted out. Not all of them took the vote at the local level in their legislative body to say, we really meant it, we don't want to be in. And there were many of those were smaller communities, like really tiny towns out in Western and Central Mass. Sure. What we're observing to our neighbor to the west, in New York, a lot of those communities opted out for a reason that was out of fear, and because they said, we don't know what we don't know, and we can opt back in pretty quickly and easily. So I think nearly half or even greater numbers opted out for social consumption and for retail, the only two that they could opt out. I think out of fear, because it was fear of the unknown, because they didn't know what the rules were going to be. I think you'll see a lot of those come back in. And it wasn't big cities, it wasn't even medium-sized cities, and it was a lot of towns and villages. So I think you'll see a bit of a scramble to come back in that case. I've not followed the other neighboring states as closely, but I've watched New York because a bunch of our operators are planning to do some stuff in New York.
Yeah, and New Jersey's had the problem. I know Connecticut. I mean, it's a story. It's a theme that is happening.
Right.
We're watching that, and so we're so convinced. I mean, at Leafly and our editors are so convinced that it is a question of access, consumer access. That means licensing and opening retail stores where consumers can purchase. Consumers are not going to drive 45 minutes to an hour each way to find a legal store when the local market will supply them. And what we're talking about right now is reframing this issue from the idea of opt out to asking the question, why are you opting in to supporting your local illicit street market? Why are you supporting the local illegal market instead of local entrepreneurs, instead of people who card at the door every single time? I mean, I've been to a number of local town council meetings where concerned parents stand up, the concerned doctor will stand up, and they will put it to politicians. Why are you voting for marijuana? Why are you putting our community at risk? And there are too few people who are frankly, bold enough to stand up and say, why are you supporting the street market? Why are you supporting illegal drug selling in our town when we could have a very highly regulated and safe environment instead? And so we're working on that framing. I think the opt-out framing is too easy for politicians to just say, oh, well, I'm in favor of safe communities, so I'm not going to allow this in our town.
Gretchen, anything that you've seen from Panoptic strategies and have some advice for the Massachusetts market?
No. I think Massachusetts will figure out in time what they need to do. I mean, honestly, when they first legalized years ago, Massachusetts looked to me to be, one of the leaders in the market because they were considering social equity and trying to put things first when other states didn't even consider it. I think Massachusetts is doing fine. I think they're on par for, typical market development. I think they'll pull together. I have no concerns about Massachusetts. There's plenty of other bad markets in this country, much worse than Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, the Washington market is a perfect rollout. There's nothing to learn from the Washington State market at all. Perfect rollout, perfect model, and nothing from this petri dish experiment.
I will shout out to Massachusetts and the data your state puts online every single week, every month. We love it. They are truly the far and away the leader in data transparency. And as reporters and editors, we love it.
Yeah, they built that in from the very beginning, and they do deserve a ton of credit for that. Sean Collins and his team over at the Cannabis Control Commission. And again, I mean, part of this is to be able to tell that story again to our friends in New York. We've been hosting delegations coming here who are like, show me what this looks like. Like, so how far into this industry are you? And, the last months ago, we hit the 2.5, 2.6, $2.7 billion in sales mark from the first two stores opening from November of 2018 to present day. It's not a theory anymore. It's not an experiment. Is it, oh, will it work? Did the sky fall? Last time I checked, the sun came out today. Right. This is not plutonium. You just need to tell people that, and framing it as an interesting sort of, you're going to support the illicit market or the legal market, and the legal market, and here's all the benefits of the legal market. We have a vested interest in selling that. But to say you're then, by not supporting the legal market, you are therefore supporting the illicit market. And that's not a good thing.
Sure. I maintain that actually anyone in America, and this may be a little bit hyperbole, but I think that anyone in America is, if they want to get some cannabis, they're 2 phone calls away. Even my 85-year-old mother, if she wanted to get cannabis, she's in Connecticut, if she wanted to get some, either she knows a person who has it, or she knows the person who has their own dealer, let's say, or their own store or their own whatever, but 2 phone calls anywhere in America. So if that's what people want to keep supporting, they should, hate on legal cannabis because they're scared of it. But otherwise, 2 phone calls and anyone can have cannabis anytime.
David, we're late for a union mandated 420 break, but before we do that, is there anything that you want to talk about before we go to break?
No, we're excited about the future. We've got some growing pains we've gone through. The bill that got reported out didn't go far enough on HCA reform, and we're going to continue to be loud and proud about beating the drum on the fact that it needs further repair.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to go over some 4 bills. Gretchen mentioned a couple of those. You don't want to miss that. Christopher is going to help us out as well. So don't go anywhere. Green Rush Live is going to be right back after this commercial break.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
Welcome back to Green Rush Live. I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm your host, while Jimmy's in the green room ironing t-shirts for giveaways. With us back is Gretchen Gailey, Panoptic Strategies, DC-based cannabis PR firm. And then we've got Bruce Barcott, senior editor at Leafly, and of course, Christopher Smith. We're going to be talking about some bills that are in the going to be passed either the House or the Senate. There's the SAFE Act and the MORE Act. There's a couple more that you may not have heard of. So Christopher, take it away.
Well, there's a lot going on in Washington, and the reason that I wanted to sort of bring these up in this segment is just because it can really be confusing, frankly, with all the acronyms flying around. Some acronyms better than others. There are 4 bills with acronyms, with names going on, and I think, in fact, I've been thinking that one of them is particularly weak in the acronym space, and I wonder if that shows really a lack of attention, in fact, by the people that are trying to push that forward. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. There are 4 acts that I'd like to just chat through and sort of go through sort of the bullet points, the high level points of the MORE Act, M-O-R-E, stands for Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. That's put forward by Jerry Nadler in the House, Democrat. We have the Safe Banking Act. Safe Banking stands for Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act. We have the HOPE Act, stands for Harnessing Opportunities by Pursuing Expungement Act, and that's put forward by 3 Democrats in the House as well. And then on the Senate side, we have Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Senator Wyden. I'm going to miss his first name first, but their unfortunately acronymed bill is called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which no one knows how to pronounce. Kawa something. So I'm always curious about this sort of thing, Gretchen, because you're a long time sort of Washington insider. When a group or an individual bill writer puts forward an act like this or a bill, the effort that goes into naming it and positioning it and describing it and making it relatable, that's a pretty significant effort. And don't you think that that's important and can really be effective?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we see this in legislation all the time. A good acronym gets it better reported on, frankly. And it's something that rolls off the tongue a lot more easily. And so people want to discuss it, and, you don't feel like such an idiot when you screw up the acronym. So if it's something simple, like Cory Booker put out a national medical bill years ago with Senator Gillibrand, and that was the Holmes Act. I mean, they actually
Perfect.
took an effort to, come up with a word. CAOA, I don't know what they were thinking. I think they were maybe stoned. Maybe that's why Chuck Schumer is not getting anything done. Maybe he has finally started to consume. He was a little stoned when he came up with that one. That's all I can think of.
It doesn't stand up. And like, when exactly to your point, Safe Banking Act, what could be more obvious? It just rolls right off the tongue. It's so easy to remember. It's so easy to be in favor of it, really, basically, fundamentally, just based on that. I think it's storytelling 101.
A good acronym also speaks to what the bill is about. So right there, I mean, SAFE, a lot of people talk about it giving, financial access to the banks, but a lot of the impetus behind it was that this industry has to operate in cash. And that is a very unsafe environment for many of these operators and folks. And so that was the hope of coming up with the SAFE Act. Same thing for the HOPE Act. It's to give expungement on the state level. So it's to provide hope for the people who receive it. So yeah, some thought should go into these things a bit more.
Yeah, it would really help grease the skids here. So one thing you and I have been talking about quite a bit, of course, is the MORE Act that just made it through the House. It's made it through the House for the second time. The Safe Banking Act has made it through the House 6 times, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And yet they run up on the rocks in the Senate every single time. What is going on? Why can't we get something through?
Well, you might be able to tell which side of the aisle I'm from by my love of Chuck Schumer. But the man refuses to play ball with cannabis unless it's his ball. He is just a big fan of taking his ball and going home. So the CAOA is what he wants to see come out first. He has planted his flag. And he's not going to bring other legislation to the floor until that goes through. I think he knows that his legislation is going to go absolutely nowhere. He doesn't have the support for it. He doesn't even have the support from his own party for it. So I think that will allow him then to bring in SAFE and HOPE together towards the end of the year during the lame duck and get those through. And he will take that as a victory lap, since he will have lost all power when the Republicans take back control of the Senate as well at the end of the year. So this will be his one last ditch effort of we've done something.
Some big issues. Well done. Well done. Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand the strategy also of, I mean, if you think about these as sort of opposing armies, the Republicans, Democrats, then if you're going to attack on Thursday, I'm pretty sure you shouldn't tell the other side, I'm going to attack on Thursday. And this is what Chuck Schumer has done. I'm going to land my big fat Democratic bill right out in front he's going to try to put it out there on 420 if he can get it done, if he can kind of button it up by then. But he's announced when he's going to do it. He's not going to bring it on him. He's not going to surprise anyone. And the text is already out there. I mean, talk about an easy battle to fight. It's amazing.
Well, we can continue. So I was going to ask if we were going to continue to see political posturing until something like the MORE or the HOPE Act passes. There's been a lot of Democratic push to get expungement. Is that going to be a requirement before we see anything else?
Well, I think when I say that they're going to couple together the HOPE Act with SAFE, because HOPE is offering expungement. SAFE doesn't do that. So advocates on that side and Democrats, they want to see something done to help with those who've been hurt by the war on drugs. And so this is their answer to supporting SAFE, is if we can put these two together, then we're going to get a little piece of what we want. Cory Booker famously said last year when they were dropping their legislation, when they were put forward the draft, that he would die on his sword until people of color, folks disproportionately hurt by the war on drugs, were taken care of. And his bill is just not going to do that. I'm sure he wants to, but as we've seen through a lot of legislation, and I'm not even talking in cannabis, when you try pushing through 500, 600, 1,000-page pieces of legislation, it's very easy for politicians to hide and say, I'm not voting for this tiny little piece of something. And so then the thing doesn't get through. If you're doing it in a much smaller piecemeal approach, you're going to make these guys stand up and say, yes, I am opposed to expungement for folks with cannabis crimes on the state level. That's what they're going to have to vote against if they vote against the HOPE Act, because nothing else is attached to it. Same thing when it comes to safe banking. I'm opposed to cannabis being allowed to bank safely. That's what these guys are going to have to stand up on the floor of the Senate and say. If you give them something like the CAOA or the MORE Act, all they can say is like, oh, I didn't like this piece, so no, I can't vote for that. And then the whole thing dies.
Sure. And safe banking, I mean, just to even as we talked about, putting things in plain language that people can understand. What safe banking about is it partly about banking regulations, but what it really is about the public safety issue of cannabis being the legal cannabis business. We say is approximately a $20 billion business, let's say ballpark. Only in cannabis does that mean that this is $20 billion bills going around our communities, literally greenbacks, because any other business uses a debit card, uses a credit card, swipes, whatever. The cash is immediately in the digital world, but not in cannabis. And therefore, cannabis businesses are targets for crime, targets for robberies. People are being killed now. In Washington State has had many of these issues just recently, and it's been happening all over the country. So it's a public safety issue as well. And expungement, on the other hand, is a way to rectify this long legacy of the racist enforcement of cannabis against brown and black people disproportionately. So,
and expungement would also help to allow these people to enter the industry, right. Because so many states have put forward their regs that say if you have some type of conviction against you, then you can't participate. Which is ridiculous because you're keeping out a lot of legacy operators and people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to cannabis, right. Because they have these convictions on their records. So expungement would allow a lot greater expertise to enter the space, which I think in some states it sorely needs.
And the quality,
Yeah,
right? The quality of product, the quality of everything we do would rise. All boats would rise. Absolutely right, Gretchen. Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing one of the effects, sadly, of sort of geographic distance out here on the West Coast, because safe banking in the last year has become. I think we talked about safe banking for many years in terms of it being an inconvenience for the people at the top of the industry, the folks with money, the multi-state operators, this sort of thing. It is not that anymore. It really has become a ground level issue. Cory Booker may want to die on a sword, but we have bud tenders who are literally being murdered out here. It started in California 2 years ago. It worked its way up to Oregon last year.
Yep.
It's hitting Washington and particularly Seattle and the Puget Sound area right now. We've had 70 armed robberies in the last 2 months. Those aren't burglaries. Those aren't people breaking in with a crowbar. Those are gang, three-person teams coming in with weapons, holding people at gunpoint. We have employees quitting their jobs because of this. Frankly, they are leaving rather than suffer the stress and the fear of undergoing this. But I think that message is not getting back to the East Coast. I think it will. I think this, frankly, this horrific form of robbery is going to travel, and it's going to start hitting Massachusetts, and it will hit New Jersey once those stores open. As one of our writers said, if you can't access banking services, you become a bank. And that's what's in the back room of every one of these stores is a bank.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The only other place in America where there's that much cash is a bank. And then you walk into a bank and there's 2 inches thick of glass and everything is alarmed and buzzard and cameras in every single light fixture. And you know how dialed in those places are. Now, dispensaries have all the security as well, but they don't have the glass, and they don't have.
And banks have the FBI coming after you.
Yeah, they have armed response, and they have the full weight of the government, right?
Yeah, you ever see the Charlestown movie?
Yeah.
Like John Hamm's FBI team is not coming after you if you rob a dispensary.
No, not at all. They could give a shit.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. And there's an article that was written that says cannabis isn't the only cash only business or business that gets robbed in general. You see robberies at liquor stores, you see robberies at banks, even though they don't have a lot on hand. I got robbed when I was a bank manager on 420, as a matter of fact. That was interesting. But I'm curious about the impact, though. Let's take a step back and say that the MORE Act does make it through. It only paves the way for interstate commerce. So what's going to be the most impactful bill that's out there in terms of banking and interstate commerce and the impacts of the industry as a whole? Of these 4 bills, what is you guys' opinions about one that's going to have the most impact for the industry as a whole?
Well, I think, frankly, any piece of legislation that were to deschedule cannabis is going to have the greatest financial impact for this industry. That gets rid of 280E. That helps with the problems with the IRS. That helps with interstate commerce. I mean, any bill that takes that on, whether it's CAOA or more, Nancy Mace's bill out of South Carolina, she has proposed a national bill. So is David Joyce out of Ohio. Any bill that really looks at descheduling is what's going to help us financially. If you look at, say, SAFE versus MORE, of course, MORE is the one that deschedules. SAFE does not do that. The one argument that I hate that good old Chuck Schumer loves to always bring forward is that he's keeping the big boys out by not allowing safe banking. The big boys are in. The big boys know how to get around this. They have the capital. The big boys aren't hurting and aren't desperate for safe banking to pass. The 60,000 BIPOC businesses in this industry that don't have access to loans and are having to deal with predatory lenders and awful people to try and finance and get the capital they need to stay in business. They're the ones who are hurting from this, not the big boys. So that argument, that always drives me nuts. So we're keeping the big boys out. Big boys are coming. So you need to put on your big girl panties and deal with it because shit's going to go happen.
Bruce?
I think you're right.
Well, it's interesting. I think that argument that other types of stores also get robbed. It's true, but the key here is cannabis stores do not have the option. I mean, I live in Seattle, and I tell you, over the last 2 years of the pandemic, so many places that I patronize as a customer are credit card only. They're no cash at all. I mean, that started with the pandemic, but it really has taken over. And if a cannabis store wanted to go cashless, they could if cannabis was descheduled, if federal prohibition falls. They simply do not have that option at this point.
Well,
I think I got to bring up a.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead,
I
Gretchen.
just want to agree with Bruce real quickly, that I think it's an asinine argument that, oh, other people die, so shoot, we shouldn't let these people try and get an ounce of safety. It's ridiculous. That's the dumbest argument I've ever heard.
Sure. And now, as we know, we have 430,000 employees, cannabis workers around the country. Now, we are a significant population. I often wonder too about, we talk about the federal government legalizing, the federal government regulating the market. And I often want to ask the very simple question is, do we want the federal government involved in our industry at all?
No,
I think they can only make a mess.
Let it
What's
go. Let states. Let's just go the prohibition model. Let the federal government just simply remove itself from the situation and let 50 states handle it in 50 different ways. We'll have strange laws like Utah had with its alcohol, right? We'll have, yeah.
I think that as much as, I'm not a fan of the feds, I think we do need them when it's going to come to consumer safety, when it comes to really looking at pesticides and levels and what's appropriate for, different products. Yeah, I think the FDA is going to have to be involved. I don't want them involved. I would love to see someone else step up and really take this on, because I don't think the FDA wants the job either. But someone is going to have to come up with federal standards for all these states to meet, at least. But to Bruce's point, sure, let's not buy beer on Sundays in Pennsylvania. That was my, whole childhood. Going to the beer mart, the liquor store. I mean, it's all just crazy, which I always thought was hilarious because we have drive-through beer marts, but oh no, can't buy it on Sunday. But let's all just pick it up in your car and tug it.
That's the Lord's Day. We want to buy double on Saturday.
That's right.
I think.
But what about I thought there was that article that you brought just the other day, might have been yesterday, Gretchen, about the agriculture department taking over instead of FDA. What do you think about that?
That's a pipe dream by folks, but this is all going to fall under the Farm Bill someday. Bless their hearts. That's a sweet idea.
We don't want it.
But yes, I can see the argument of cannabis being treated like any other crop, as it should be. It's a plant. It's going to be a commodity just like corn. So it needs to be looked at in that way. But just like any other product, that's made of corn, it has to, meet the standards of the FDA and stuff. It's going to go on store shelves and, actually not kill you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that way, I love what you said. I think in that way, cannabis is a lot like peanuts, right? Where it's a food item, and it's got a risk factor to some people. Peanuts do, right? So I mean, cannabis has risk factors of some types, psychoactivity, etc. It's not really that hard to conceive of how to actually how to regulate this. I mean, I've been reading through Schumer's bill, and I'm just thinking, boy, there's a lot of extra layers. They want to add an extra layer in the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They want to add an extra layer in the health department. They want to add an extra layer, and that's why Schumer wants to charge up to 25% more tax on top of what we're already getting charged. I mean,
I don't think when it comes to federal regulations that you can separate adult use and medicinal. I don't think there should be separate rules. I don't even think there should really be separate rules for hemp. It's all the same plant. It needs to be regulated in the same ways.
We need to put it back together in a different way than it really got sort of disassembled in the whole prohibition reefer madness mythology, that cannabis and hemp are totally different. They're exactly the same plant, actually. One, it's like just two varieties of the same plant. One has high THC, one doesn't. There's also a really tall one that's good for fiber. There's a really short one that's good for grain. There's, these are just different varieties of exactly the same plant. We got to put it back in, put all that stuff back in the bottle somehow.
I prefer to do it without government, though. If we can remove as many government officials as we can, put them in a committee somewhere and leave them in that room to talk all they want while we have an SRO, just like the banking industry that has a self-regulatory organization where we make the laws and then they give those to government officials. I'd rather leave the government out of it, FDA or otherwise, and then just let that committee have their own discussion whenever they want. But that's my opinion. Little government is possible.
Honestly, it would be great if we could do that, but I think it's impossible to bring this industry together. They can't even decide on, one way to legalize federally. If we were, as my friends call out in Humboldt, beyond compliant, if we were actually willing to live by those standards and everyone signed on to something to saying, yes, we're going to do this. If the testing labs did not lie about the levels of THC that they're putting out, or, people going to the best lab for the highest bidder, if you could actually rely on the folks who are trying to set standards in this industry, then we can move forward and do something. I mean, that's what nutraceuticals did. Nutraceuticals said, here's what we want to do. And the government was like, all right, cool. We don't need to make up these rules. You've done it for me. Perfect. But we can't get out of our own way to actually pull that off.
That's a great point. Great point.
Well, I think with that, we got another commercial break coming up, I believe.
Just on time, Josh.
Yeah, I want to thank Gretchen, Gailey, Panoptic Strategies. That's a DC-based cannabis PR firm. And then, of course, there's Bruce Barcott. He's the senior editor at Leafly. I want to thank you guys again for being on this segment, talking all about bills in the House and the Senate, things that might happen, might not. We'll see.
All right.
Don't miss this next segment coming up. We're going to be talking with some good guests about the Last Prisoner Project. You don't want to miss that coming up.
Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV programming is supported by Revolutionary Clinics in Massachusetts, the #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 accounting solution for the cannabis industry. And by TCP's Style Lighting Grow Kit, all you need to grow. We're calling all growers on Pro Cannabis Media once again.
I really think the future of our industry has to do with proprietary genetics.
Jim Belushi is back on his farm in Oregon, and the calendar turns to April, bringing showers and another Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
So if you have a really, really root-bound plant, if you take it out and it's white roots everywhere and they're all congested up, you do need to tease them out so that they don't continue to coil and strangle themselves.
Cannabis farmer from Humboldt County, Wendy Kornberg, is back publishing another skunk magazine. So this time, Liz welcomes Ed Rosenthal, an accomplished author, speaker, and legendary grower. It all begins on Wednesday, April 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, on Pro Cannabis Media's network, live and PCM TV on Roku and Apple. Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV programming is supported by Revolutionary Clinics in Massachusetts, the #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 accounting solution for the cannabis industry. And by TCP's Style Lighting Grow Kit, all you need to grow. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
Welcome back to Green Rush Live. I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm your host while Jimmy is out walking a pack of long-haired chihuahuas. I guess he lost a bet. With me is Christopher Smith. We're going to be talking about the Last Prisoner Project. Christopher, it's Friday. Happy Friday, man.
Thank you, sir. Same to you. Now, both of us we're shouting up and down the West Coast. I'm down in the bottom in Los Angeles area. You're in Seattle area, or are you just in Washington somewhere?
I am in Seattle. I am literally across the street from the SeaTac airport. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you geographically where I'm at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next time I drop in, I'm calling you for a ride.
Yeah. Yeah. You can always park at my house and walk there. It's that close.
Okay.
The last segment, we were talking about some of the robberies and how they kind of started out in California, worked their way up. I briefly mentioned that I was robbed on 420. I was telling my coworkers at the bank I worked at, be careful. I was trying to explain what it is. I was like, this is the Halloween for drug dealers. And then literally like 2 minutes later, this guy comes in, oil can with a gun, and it's like, everybody on the ground. I was like, oh my God. So the FBI thought I was an insider because I, had some intuition, I guess. I don't know, but it's frightening to have somebody pull a gun on you because you have no idea what's going to happen. So you hear about it. It's kind of something that people don't think about, and yet it's prevalent throughout the entire industry, or at least on the West Coast in this existing marketplace. So, as we talk about the Last Prisoner Project and folks that have gone into jail for nonviolent crimes, for just trying to grow a plant, it's an interesting period that we're in, where you're seeing a massive amount of robberies, no legislation to protect it, and still prisoners in jail for simply growing a plant.
It's a remarkable mix or mix up or blend. I think we'll look back on this period and wonder how these things will become unraveled, because they have to. There's no logic to what's happening. I think, like you're saying, number one is we have a regulatory environment which forces our businesses to operate in cash only, which means that, like you said in the previous segment, I thought that was great, that any business that has to hold a lot of cash is effectively a bank. So these dispensaries, for example, have cash, and some of them, depending on how well they do, they're making perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. Well, if they can't take that money to the bank, they have to keep it in the safe. And sometimes they have to keep it in alternative safes off, sort of off campus or whatever. Anyway, dealing with cash is like catnip for robbers, of course, so it just attracts crime because they know where there's going to be A, cannabis, and B, of course, lots of free cash. Mm-hmm. So it puts those, not only those workers, but it puts the customers at the dispensary and, of course, the people in that local community, it keeps them at risk. So these regulations that are sort of not quite fixed are really keeping people at risk. And it's a huge negative for our industry.
There are some positive groups out there when it comes to veterans, 22 Too Many, and some of these other groups that are trying to support one another from the ground up. And from top down, we're seeing the MORE Act and the HOPE Act. But from the ground up, we're seeing things like Last Prisoner Project. Can you tell the audience who don't know about Last Prisoner Project a little bit about maybe how it got developed and what it is and why it's there? Because the government should just come and offer something, right?
Well, it's I think the opposite side of the coin of what we're talking about in terms of stores being vulnerable to robberies. This is, robbery is a violent crime. And armed robbery is potential for the ultimate violent crime, of course, and that is not what the Last Prisoner Project is set up to deal with at all. In fact, it's the opposite, right? So in cannabis, we know that the laws and the structure around the prohibition of cannabis were created from the beginning, really, to negatively impact communities of color. Back in the 1930s, when the Marijuana Tax Act was created through the declaration of the War on Drugs in 1970 by Nixon, there was a consistency, which was that Black and brown communities were the bad actors in these spaces. Nixon's, I can't remember which advisor it was. If I heard his name, I would be able to tell you, but he's been quoted as saying that the reason that the war on drugs was declared was because Nixon had voting blocs that were against him, blacks and hippies, basically. He called them anti-war demonstrators, but it was basically blacks and hippies. And instead of trying to convince them not to vote against them, in fact, what he did was he criminalized cannabis in particular, so that he wanted to put them in jail, basically. Well, they can't vote when they're in jail. They can't vote after because now they've got a felony, right? So this was a very Machiavellian kind of strategy to punish specific groups of people. And as we know, statistically, Black and brown people have been affected negatively by the war on drugs in a sort of a ratio of about 4 to 1. The number of arrests, the number of actual incarcerations after arrest are maximally targeted toward Black and brown people. And even today, or even as recently as last year, the ratio of Black and brown to white people who are in the legal system for cannabis, this is like stop and frisk and those sorts of things. The ratio of Black and brown people is astronomically in favor of, well, I don't know if you'll say in favor of white people, but against Black and brown people. Therefore, the residual problem of cannabis is, of this structure that has operated in this way for such a long time, the residual is that there are still today at least 40,000 prisoners still in prison. Now, these are in local prisons, state prisons, not federal, local prisons, 40,000 people that are still imprisoned for crimes that are essentially not crimes anymore. In many, as we know, 38, 39 states have legalized cannabis for medicinal use. 18 or 19, depending in Washington, D.C., depending on how you count it, have legalized for all the way across the board adult use, right? Anyone over 21. Even in those states, there are still people being arrested. There are still people in prison. And the Last Prisoner Project is designed, or was founded, to try to get those people, not only to get them out of jail, because some of them are languishing. Some of them are languishing, and there are case studies that they show us where people have got life sentences for very small crimes. And if you were to hear some of these crimes, your logic alarm would go off. So 40,000 prisoners still imprisoned around the United States who need to be released. And some of the states are building it. This is the issue of expungement. It's the issue of release and also of expunging their records. So again, two separate issues. One is just getting them out of jail. First of all, getting them out of that horrible environment, getting them back onto the free side of society. But the second part is to expunge those old records so that these people can get on with their lives in a normal way. If you have a felony for a drug arrest or a drug incarceration, depending on the state, if you have a felony, you can't vote, you can't get a student loan. Many times you can't be admitted into school. You can't, there are many employment opportunities that you can't follow. You can't pursue law enforcement. You can't pursue medical, I believe, if you've got a felony on your record in some, depending on the jurisdiction. So the lasting problem, incarceration is bad and it's bad enough, but then it's a life sentence really in many cases, especially at the level of having felonies. So I'm going to breathe now. Very long-winded way of saying what the Last Prisoner Project, I believe, is trying to do is trying to get these non-violent prisoners out of prison and then use resources that are also available through other organizations to try to get these folks back on their feet, to get their records expunged so they have a clean record going forward, to get them job training, life training, get them, sometimes even a place to live. When you get kicked out of prison, they give you like $100 and they say, sort of, see you later. No wonder so many end up back in prison, in almost no time. It's a terrible system. And so the Last Prisoner Project has been working quite hard in this. One of the cool things about the cannabis industry is that there are several companies, especially there are two that I know of here in California, that provide immediate support and constant support for the Last Prisoner Project. Cannacraft is one, and I was going to name the Dalton family company, Ocean Products. I'm sorry, I'm getting that wrong. I apologize. Also provide, let's say, $1 per product or a certain amount of money per product sold directly to the Last Prisoner Project. So there's a lot of activity in this direction, and it's really the right thing to do.
Joining us on the conversation is Tom Howard from Cannabis. He's a cannabis industry lawyer based out of Illinois and host of Cannabis Legalization News. Tom, thanks for being with us. Green Rush Live.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Josh. Hopefully things are going well on the West Coast. It's a little cold and chilly here in the nation's heartland.
It's pretty toasty over this way. It's Friday too, so we're not going to complain regardless. With the Last Prisoner Project, I know you and your co-host Miggy have talked to some folks and had these conversations. I know Illinois is not exempt from some of these issues with people of color and being displaced with the war on drugs and being impacted negatively by that whole campaign. What influence, though, does Last Prisoner Project have, if any, on the state of Illinois? Do they have a presence out there?
They may. When Craig Cecil, guest on the show a few weeks ago, came on, he's got this wonderful Chicago accent, and so he's from southern Chicago, I believe. And so he was involved with the Last Prisoner Project for a while until he didn't jive with their business vision. And so he kind of got exited. And that wasn't like the only time that I've heard that about the Last Prisoner Project, where they do real work, but then that real work might just be PR, because then there's other guests that we've had, like Weldon Angelos on the show. We've had Steve D'Angelo on the show too, and I'm agnostic. Like, those 40,000 people that are in there, they should not be in there. And usually when people tend to get a cash flow, they like to protect that cash flow. I understand like both kind of things, but I don't like that Craig Cecil, who was in prison for his whole life until he was commuted by former President Trump, he's not social equity. He can't get a license in the state of Illinois. He was caught with too much weed. I think that's kind of silly. I don't like how in the aspect of the social equity, they gamified it. And then they've almost made it superfluous in the sense that provided that you had the right corporate structure and organizational documents and buy-sell agreements all disclosed to the state, you were social equity. But then as soon as you won, like the social equity guy gets shrunk down from 51 to 5% and paid $50,000 and shown the door. And you're like, well, why did you even make it? Why did you even do that system that way if it was that easy to get around? But, you know, I applaud the Last Prisoner Project for the work that they're doing to get people out of prison. Other than that, it's an interesting industry.
Is the state of Illinois doing anything on their own? I mean, I know they've got social equity tied into some of the marijuana lounges and hospitality bills and some of those other things, but are they exclusively looking at something independently similar to the MORE or HOPE Act?
They have had expungements built in, automatic expungements. And then if you got automatic expungements, if you had something that they created and defined like a minor cannabis offense. However, a lot of the other arrests were not eligible for those, and they've amended the law to make it easier for those expungements to happen. They've had a lot of the revenues that's been generated from the cannabis sales going back to what they call the R3 programs, which would help with the expungement clinics. So that type of rehabilitation is out there and built into the Illinois law. But, you know, that's kind of like it that I've really seen for that aspect of it.
Well, because why you're mentioning, I think part of that is because expungement is not free. You know, if you want to get your records, the state's going to charge you. If you want to get the records changed, well, they're going to charge you for that. So, and many times, you know, an average guy, like I'm an average lay person, you're a lawyer, but I'm an average guy, right? So I would have to hire you to help me get through the paperwork and get those, make sure that I've crossed all the T's and, you know, dotted all the I's and make sure I've checked all the boxes in the right way, right? So that costs money, right? So some of the things that some of these organizations, not Last Prisoner Project, but some are working on also is trying to reduce the cost of all that stuff, because it's just yet another way to make it impossible for prisoners to get back on their feet.
Christopher, does the Last Prisoner Project have legislative support? Are they being listened to when drafting legislation for the MORE or HOPE Act or something similar? Or is this more of a independent grassroots community organization?
I believe it's more of the latter. I don't believe that they're trying to necessarily get on national legislation, but I'm not sure. I'm probably not the best person to ask. Their website is really very extensive in terms of what their mission is and what they're doing. And their organization is very, very responsive. So if anyone has a question for them, I know that question can be answered very, very quickly and very completely, actually. I've had very good response.
Yeah, and we did want to have somebody on the show to talk about that. Unfortunately, scheduling didn't work out last minute, so we're going to be talking about it regardless, because we think it's an important issue to talk about, and hopefully have them back on and have their representation and get some of that good Q&A. But in the meantime, between Washington and California and Illinois, there's plenty of issues out there from you know, whether it's the robberies I mentioned and or some of the important issues with social equity. We're definitely on that same pathway. All three states all dealing with the same issues at the same time, even though the West Coast is a mature market, Illinois is kind of an emerging market. We're still at that same level where we all recognize the issue that some of these communities that have been really hit and don't have those opportunities, even when they get out of prison, like you mentioned, Tom, still not available, still not perfect, but they're going to try and do their best. Is it enough though?
No, I don't think that they're trying to do their best. I think that the Illinois program was written by the MSOs to create a feeder system for them to be able to pick up distressed assets on the cheap and expand their reach. And that is me, a former bank lawyer, one of the most jaded of all lawyers, a bank lawyer, and then seeing how the social equity licensing structure of Illinois has, you know, led to like what I would describe as sham transactions that are blessed by the state as social equity. And then also placing people into a predicament where the smallest grow costs about like $8 to $9 million to get off the ground. And they don't have that. They've disclosed a private capital raise for getting operational, which doesn't take 6 months. And then the state gives them 6 months to be operational. Even if you had the millions of dollars and the credit already lined up, then you could press go the construction still would probably take longer than 6 months. They just seem like they've set it up so well that it's not going to move. And the only thing that's going to happen is people are going to, fail to launch, and that'll create distressed assets that can be bought on the cheap, or it's going to be a never-ending piece of litigation, so that there's no competition that comes online. And then, like I said, like once they have their 10 licenses, that's really all the product they can move in that state, unless they're in all the other dispensaries. And it's just, there hasn't been any new dispensaries since they legalized it almost 3 years ago now. No new dispensaries, legalized it in May of 2019. What the heck? Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen some shady deals up in this state too, where the owner of Harvest Health was acquired by, or excuse me, the owner of Have a Heart was acquired by Harvest Health out of Arizona, which has since been merged. So when the owner of the Washington State Have a Heart got his money, went to California, bought a license through a social equity applicant, and then went some backdoor deal, found his business partner, paid the business partner off, whereas the main person had no idea this transaction was going on, found himself out of a license, and then tried to sell that to High Times. So
yeah, that sounds like, circumvention, unjust enrichment, quantum merit. There's a list of quasi-contractual claims that a guy like me has no problem. Like I got out of court like 2 years ago because I was the man's man. When the bank got in trouble, they'd be like, well, we'll call you. And then I'd be deposing wealthy people that had stolen money from banks. I wasn't too thrilled about it. But now if it's going to be these businessmen, let's call it, that are engaging in shady practices, I got no problem suing the crap out of them, provided the clients can pay.
One of the things I find, Tom, tell me if you seeing it the same way. I remember reading recently how Connecticut was proclaiming its magnificence as a social equity sort of landscape, right? How they've set the standard higher for the way that we're going to do social equity, the state of Connecticut. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's really take a look at it. And the tiny little box that they put a social equity applicant into and expect him to be able to perform, I think it's pretty much what you were just describing. The social equity applicant, which they never really say, really probably ought to be a black or brown person. So we're just not actually going to put that part in the legislation, but you got wink, wink, right? So not only, so there's that person, they have to live in a certain census tract, which is a low income community census tract. And they have to have lived there for the last 5 years. They have to have a certain level of income that is not wealthy. They have to have a certain, basically middle-class income, live in a low-income community for the last 5 years, and yet they have to have access to $3 million cash plus another $2 million that they have to keep in escrow, and they have to be 51% owners of an entity that is going to apply for a social equity license.
Is it
worse than that?
Yes. The clarity on this, and again, this is a closing window, and so the clients that want to get in, let's get your application together, because it's a conditional application for social equity. I haven't heard about the $2 million in escrow. I have heard about the $3 million, but it's 65%. It's not 51%. A social equity venture, joint venture, can be 51%.
Okay.
But and not only that, so that the $3 million is hilarious. But then you have to have this ownership and control be to this person who's poor, essentially,
right?
They aren't going to be able to cut a $3 million check. And then they have to have 65% ownership. And then, the $2 million bond, I haven't heard of that. I'll have to see. But the regulations and the user interface for Connecticut's website that they have for their licensing system is kind of like, developed by somebody who must do casinos, because it just leads from one place to another. And then eventually you're lost and you're like, well, I'm trying to find this, and you can't find anything. Like the organizational file structure is garbage. And then you have to log into something else and create a profile and then upload all this stuff. And so right now it's really about, helping those people put this thing together. And yeah, not one of those social equity applicants will be the person striking that check. Not
Of course
one.
not. It's virtually impossible. Yeah.
It's virtually impossible, and it's probably going to be classified as a loan of some sort. So now you are launching this social equity company that just has a conditional license for somebody who's 65% ownership and $3 million in debt.
Right.
And then they got to go build
paying
a
the
$3 million facility, you know?
Right. And paying the VIG on that $3 million, right? And so, yeah, it's just, it's
that
ludicrous.
has to get paid back before they see one lick of profit. And then not only that, all right, now let's go build out like a $10 million facility. And then, okay, so if you're going to do that, and are you going to acquire that real estate? No, probably not. But you might have an affiliated entity that acquires it. Now you have a long-term lease, and then you can jack them on the lease as well. And then now you keep the facility asset, and you get the benefit of that with the depreciations and the accrual of actual, you know, equity and wealth. And then you just have a tenant in there who owes you $3 million.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
And
they claim that this is social equity at its best. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. It's really
they do that. Like sometimes when Ted Cruz is really being a shit, you'll see him kind of like believing his own crap and like, I'm getting away with this. And you'll see him kind of like smiling. I would love to see the politicians in Connecticut trying to say with all sincerity in their face that this is real social equity. Yeah.
Before we take a quick commercial break, do you guys think that this is going to happen anytime soon? Will you see in 2022 any kind of substantial equity law pass at the local or national level?
No. And then like the other thing is that I have people that are saying that they think the MORE Act has a shot. And I'm like, are you kidding? The MORE Act can't have a shot. I mean, like, Ketanji Brown barely made it through her confirmation process. There was only like 3 Republican senators that voted for a qualified representative. This is like Judge Scalia, conservative, you know, firebrand Judge Scalia still got appointed like 96-4 or something like that. You know, the country is just too splintered. And then you look at the vote in the crazy place, the House, not the Senate, where they're even more conservative and stodgy. And it was like 2 or 3 out of like the 200 Republicans voted for it. It was 97, 98% against. I don't think you get one Republican senator that would vote for the MORE Act. And then you'd have to have every single Democrat vote for it. And it would pass by 1 vote. I don't think Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer, who's championing a different bill, is going to allow that to ever come up for a vote.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath. But don't hold your breath either. We're going to be right back. We're going to talk about the sales differences between Illinois, Washington, and California when we come back to Green Rush Live. Don't go anywhere.
Difference is building a solution for that individual, not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the cost low. We have multiple tiers, you know, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, you know, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information. Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV programming is supported by Revolutionary Clinics in Massachusetts, the #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first. And by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 accounting solution for the cannabis industry. And by TCP's Style Lighting Grow Kit, all you need to grow.
Welcome back to Green Rush Live. I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm your host today with Jimmy is out. We got to go and buy a battery for the projector. Jimmy's actually a hologram. I don't know if you guys knew that. He's not even real. But we've got a guest, Tom Howard. He's with Cannabis Legalization News. Yeah.
Yep,
And also
Cannabis Legalization News. The name of my firm is Collateral Base.
Collateral.
I did one of those things where I started a company and then I never, ever try to brand or promote it. It was just supposed to sound really good to banks so that I would have no problem opening a bank account as what we call in the industry a tier 2 MRB. That is a marijuana related business, but it's an ancillary and so I just today signed up my first non-cannabis client in like 2 years because of Illinois just being just a turd out there when it comes to issuing new licenses.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the Illinois sales. According to Headset's data, your total sales in Illinois is $140 million last month, and that's been dropping significantly. So is it, you have to kind of infer from the data, Tom, but are you thinking that it's from out-of-state people that aren't coming in anymore, or is it people that are cutting back because of inflation, or what do you think it is like the last 6 months consistently seeing sales decrease?
There's several things that are going on. First, the number of new operators is zero. And so we're really only talking about a population of almost 13 million and 110 retail locations. That's it. No delivery. You have to go there. And just an eighth, when you walk out the door after all the taxes on there as an adult, is probably in the ballpark of $75. Now, the other thing you have is medical grow that I have in my basement and a lot of other medical card holders have, and medical sales have been stagnant. However, illicit sales are up, and illicit sales are probably to explain why it's stalled and why there's no new increase. There's no new supply that's coming online in the terms of operators. There's no new supply coming online in the terms of new products that might crash the price, like in a Washington State or a California. When you walk into that dispensary or that pot shop, as they call it up there, you can leave with a high quality eighth for less than $35. That is impossible in the state of Illinois. Just absolutely impossible. Now, if we had 100 craft growers and 185 new dispensaries crashing the price, it's like from a $60 an eighth to a $45 eighth to a $35 eighth, the guys that are selling on the street, they wouldn't be as attractive anymore. But there's been no enforcement of it. The illicit market is booming, and nobody's getting arrested for it. So why? I mean, like, if you can go buy it from your guy and it's better, it's fresher, it's runts, it's not, Cresco presents a new cross. One of its parents might have been runts. It's the actual strain that you were trying to find, as opposed to the MSO interpretation of that strain. Plus, it's not a great experience buying weed in Illinois. You go there, it's kind of like, it reminds me of I'll date myself, obviously, the Seinfeld episode, the Soup Nazi, where you go in, get checked in, you say your thing, you go to the next thing, you take your bag, and yes, it's in a paper bag, and you leave. End of discussion. You're not hanging out. You don't get to inspect any flower, bulk flower, raw flower, none of that. And so that's my take as to why. And I'm kind of surprised that numbers haven't even gone down, but they've definitely stalled.
Yeah, I'm seeing even the sales growth was at 33% in January, dipped to 17 in February, came up a little bit, whereas Washington's negative. Our year over sales growth is -8, -11, -7%. And California is kind of flat. I would say 4 and 6 and 7% sales growth is flat for California. That brought in $420 million in sales in February, but is still seeing consistently decreasing sales. Christopher, what's the story behind that? Because if you're seeing decreasing in sales, a lot of people are saying it's the illicit market, and yet that I don't know if the illicit market is taking money away, unless it's the people are running away from the regulated marketplace because of inflation or high prices, or unless there's a better alternative. What's your take, Christopher? Why is there a decrease in overall sales?
I have to admit to you, Josh, that I've been buying less weed, and I'm afraid it's crashing the market in California. I'm sorry. And I'm gonna have to up my game a little bit, and I'm gonna have to
go
kind of get
long
back
the
out
stocks
there and,
first. You know,
I'm gonna be juicing that market all by myself and getting it done. I think that you know, a reading of most news would tell us that, you know, COVID, for example, last couple of years, I think made strange a lot of numbers, and I think we'll probably find this across the board in many industries. Either you know, big jumps or big dives because of COVID, because we've been locked inside, because we haven't been able to socialize, all of those sorts of things. Being locked inside and not able to socialize, I think, sent a lot of people to buy at the dispensaries. I think that helps sales a lot. So it may be that the pullback is really a lot more natural and a lot more sort of natural cycle than we think. I worry that we get into these, you know, even in any other industries, we're talking about stock price, whatever, we get stuck into that quarterly reporting, which is such a short window. And that, you know, markets and the companies and industries take a lot more time to actually evolve and have things actually happen. So if we look at every single quarter, we're more likely to try to interpret some kind of disaster into those numbers, when in fact a longer look might help. So maybe the annual numbers are maybe a little bit more helpful. In California, the thing that, you know, we talked about quite a bit, and I know that everybody's sort of heard our tale of woe about massive overproduction and massive under representation at the retail level. So we have a huge amount of product that's depressing the price of that product because there's so much. So law of supply and demand means that, you know, when there's lots of supply, price goes down. Also, we have less retail options than we should. I think maybe like you were saying, Tom, about Illinois, you have a terribly small number of retail outlets in Illinois based on the population. It's massively under supported. We have the same problem in California. We have something like 70% of the municipalities in California have opted out of having local cannabis dispensaries. An effort that I'm actually sort of involved in. So, many of these municipalities actually voted in favor of, but then the local city councils didn't allow cannabis. So there's a shift, there's a change happening. You know, the will of the voters wasn't even really respected. So hopefully those things are becoming righted as well. So prices going down, stock prices, this and that. There's a lot of consolidation happening in California as well. We have some of the bigger, more recognized brands. For example, there's the sort of the legendary dispensary brand out here called Harborside, has just merged together with another dispensary brand called Urban Leaf, and a third company, which is a manufacturer, a grower manufacturer called Loud Pack. So they put that together three-way. That new entity is called State House. Interestingly, it's being the CEO of State House is the CEO of Urban Leaf, not of Harborside. You would think that the big, well-known entity would come out on top, but in fact, that's not what's happened. So the CEO is of Urban Leaf's guy named Ed Schmaltz, who's now the head of this new entity. Just yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, the local dispensary competitor of Urban Leaf, local community being San Diego area, called March and Ash, is now combining with a grower manufacturer called Cannacraft. So that consolidation is happening a lot in California. So we're going to be seeing some shifts in branding of stores and products and that sort of thing. So there's an awful lot of change happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't have any information on the consolidation in Illinois, but Washington is one out of the top 10 brands own 1/5 of the market in Washington, whereas in California, the top 10 brands own 1/3 of the market. So pretty significant. And when we look at year over year in terms of the average amount that individuals are going in and spending, it peaked in May of last year. So with Illinois, right now, the average basket size, or the amount of that people are going in and buying each time, is decreasing. But in some markets, the amount that they're going to the store is increasing. So it's like they're going in and spending less, but they're going more often. And that's a matter of convenience. I would say, in normal times, that would be an indicator that the market is maturing. But I think a lot of it has to do with inflationary pressures, and people just can't afford to go and spend a lot. So in Illinois, on average, they're going in and spending $88.50, and they're going 1.5 million times. Washington, however, they're spending like $33, but they're going in twice as often. They're going in over 3 million times. So it's about price and convenience. That's the main decision maker for any product, no matter what. And in Washington, we definitely have been around a long time, and it's all about convenience. I would say the average basket size in California, as high as it was, is because you have delivery. We don't. So your delivery price of $65 keeps that artificially high. But the fact that it's at $59 now tells me that more and more people are going into the store and bringing that price down. But there's still 6.8 million people going in and buying stuff. Are you seeing anything to the contrary, Christopher? Or would you say that you're seeing more people going back in as some of these lockdowns has been lifted?
I think I'm going to speculate really here, just about sort of general behavior. I do believe that inflation is affecting people like it is anywhere. And so we're probably talking about groceries and gasoline and every sort of buying decision, is a little bit more expensive these days. I think that we're really, all of us are realigning or getting sort of readjusted or reacquainted with the normal work life and the normal sort of schedule of things, and going out to meals and going to the movies and all the sort of pre-COVID things that were normal business. So we're getting used to all that sort of stuff. I just think that I get the sense just sort of socially that there's sort of everyone's sort of pulling back a little bit and trying to kind of readjust and figure out what's happening. I'm just not so sure that all of these numbers are necessarily indicative. I just think that they're a snapshot maybe, but I'm not sure if they indicate any sort of long-term trend.
How about you, Tom? $88 is still quite a bit. It's almost 3 times as much as Washington. People are still out there getting their fill with cannabis, standing in long lines, or what's the scene these days?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first, in Illinois, we only have 21 cultivators, and 6 of them control 77% of the market.
Oh boy.
And so you really have a couple options. That's it. And then I think you're absolutely right that inflation's playing a role, simply because if it costs, people are on fixed incomes. They don't get to go to the boss and be like, hey, prices are up 10%. I need my weed. But weed prices really aren't up that much. And so I haven't seen inflation hit that like at the gas station, for example. And so I think that definitely explains why the sales would be down. But it's expensive to go to the dispensary in Illinois. It is. Like if you go there and you get out and you've not spent $100, you did good. The cheapest eighth that you can get is probably $45. And that would be one of those eighths that they've cut because it wasn't selling, and then it's getting close to its recall date or its expiration date. But then, if you're Verano, which is 33 cents on the dollar of cannabis sold in Illinois in 2020, was Verano weed. Man, that's a great position to be in if you can. And then you only have so many places that it can be sold. And you had that kind of market share. All these other forces, I don't think really bother them that much.
That's Rockefeller country right there. That's Standard Oil sort of control level.
There's a lot of money being thrown around right now. Cresco Labs merging with Columbia. So you have your Illinois and your New York merger. When you guys think about that and like big cannabis versus thinking about something that people actually want, which I think of like a cookies brand that has those genetics that you desire. When you're looking at the industry as a whole and you have those two kind of dichotomies between what people want and what's being offered to you, where do you see the industry headed? Is it going to be a combination of both, or are we going to see one dominate the other, or what are you guys looking forward to?
Chris, go ahead on that one.
I think, well, first of all, I'm not sure that too many brands have really established themselves or sort of singled themselves out for any particular meaning. I mean, out here in California, for example, we have one brand that I like quite a lot just for their branding. It's called Papa and Barkley. The legend, or the founder's legend of Papa and Barkley, is wonderful and heartwarming. As a matter of fact, the founder's father was ill with cancer, and he created a cannabis balm, a topical, which helped him in his last days survive more comfortably. And Barkley was the dad's dog. So anyway, the whole brand is built around a story that's, of course, very heartwarming and connective. The workings of the brand, the people who are working and developing new products, are extremely passionate and missioned about high quality, natural, and really, really authentic processes, authentic, local growers and that kind of stuff. So they're top to bottom, really, really missioned around an absolutely top quality product. At the other side, I think we have groups like Tom, I think we're talking about, like Verano, for example. They're just big, right? Big weed. Big, like the big Canadian weed companies, right? The big giants, they have 100, 200,000 square foot, indoor grows kind of stuff. They put out, thousands and thousands of pounds out the door every week kind of a thing. And the quality is quite a different level. I'm not sure if people, honestly, there are purists, of course. We get, just like in craft beer or wine or tequila or anything, cars, I guess, people who need a certain level of quality. But I'll bet that there is, in addition to the broad legalization, I think there's a broad sort of people getting used to what they're willing to pay, what kind of high they're looking for. I'll bet a lot of people are willing to sort of say, I get high, that's enough.
Mm.
I think it may be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd agree with him on that. I think a lot of the consumers are not snobs. A lot of the consumers are passive. It's like, it gets me high, it costs this much, it's convenient in my purse for a vape pen or something like that, or it's a pack of pre-rolls and I'm going to go out to the game or the concert with the guys, that type of thing. Those aspects, I think, is where big weed is going to shine, when it can be convenience and when it can be keeping it low key or something like that. But what Berner and the Cookies people have done is very impressive by taking one of the biggest challenges in the industry, the acquisition of the actual tier 1 MRB plant touching license. That is a crapshoot like I've never seen. And then you put social equity into the mix. And now I'm talking about, like, I'm going to get a Ouija board out. We're going to get your team right. Let's figure out how we get through this license. And so if you have this brand that's based on IP, you can just kind of glaze over the top of that stuff and move. And that's the aspect of the industry that I find really, really intriguing. And the only way that I could see a true nationwide player, but the other guys, the Veranos, the GTIs, they're just too frickin' confident in their own abilities to even recognize that. They're like, no, our stuff's going to be the best. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have all this. And then the other guy's playing a different game and just kicking their ass. And then everybody's using their genetics and just crossing them up and then saying, like, oh yeah, we got that. It's like, it's not really that. Like, you'd have to get the IP from him to be able to put this genetic into, your circulation. But I just think that's, as people get a relationship more with the plant, it becomes more publicly accepted. I mean, like shows like this, there is an ongoing algorithmic censorship that is preventing this law from getting changed. You just can't tell how many people actually want this changed because of the active censorship of YouTube, of Facebook, of social media, because they do not want to be complicit in a federal crime. And I get it. I mean, that makes perfect sense. And so that allows these people that are publicly traded to try to force their brands by acquiring the actual license. And that it's just difficult to do because, I was talking to a guy from Missouri today and he's like, yeah, we're really lucky to be able to pull this off and all that other stuff. But of course, the the mayor's friends in St. Louis got a license, and the guys in Kansas City and the governor's buddies, they got a whole bunch. And I'm like, really? You know, that happens in every state when they try to limit the market and control it. And so like Florida is the prime example of that. One company,
Oh my goodness.
and that company wrote the rules. Talk about rent-seeking behavior. It's like, what can we do that no one else has? Put an orange grove in the statute, you know, and I see the opposite for the social equity. It's like, how do we make sure that everybody who comes in after us is going to just totally blow it, fail, and then we can pick them up for pennies on the dollar? Well, make sure that they're woefully undercapitalized. And then in the case of Connecticut, they owe somebody else $3 million to boot, you know?
They'll sell for anything we're going to offer them. Absolutely. Then we'll pick them all up. Absolutely. Yeah. The Florida market, boy, is utterly corrupt. And we have to also remember that we're in a country where something like 70% of people drink Budweiser. So quality is not the first choice, right? The brand, the price, in the shopping cart, off to the game. I mean, it's, you know, it's that. So there's a whole lot of adjustment. You know, cannabis is different by nature that we all know about, of course, because we are, you know, we are among connoisseurs, and I don't even consider myself really a connoisseur at all. And yet, you know, we are knowledgeable enough to know how quality is developed and why quality matters. But I think a lot of people are like, I got high.
Here's a loaded question. Ballot initiatives have been replaced by legislative initiatives. I think it's because lobbyists prefer that, or these vested or interested companies that want limited licenses and can, you know, benefit financially from that, want a legislative initiative, want a limited license state. Would you guys agree with that, as we kind of see Scott's going in $250,000 in New York, and you know, these the Cresco Columbia deal, these massive mergers where they kind of just see big conglomerates forming? Is that a result of the legislative initiatives allowing that to happen?
Maybe Illinois was, maybe California's was. But with what they're doing in New York, and that was my topic today, the dispensing side, that looks exactly like what they did in Illinois, and they're going to be screwed. But we don't know yet because we don't have all the regs. And then the cultivation side is fascinating in the sense that the only people that can do it for the first 2 years are hemp farmers. But that at least, you know, decentralizes the supply of the product. And then there's no dispensaries yet. And they've made it, they could super social equity in New York for dispensaries. It's called Justice Involved. Nobody is going to be this. It's hilarious. And so first, you have to be a marijuana convict. Then you also have to own at least 10% of a company that has turned a profit for the past 2 years. So then it gets a little bit more, you know, tomfoolery. Then they judge you by how social equity justice involved you are. They say, well, was it your arrest, or was it your kid's arrest, or your spouse's arrest? Well, where were you arrested? Were you arrested in the projects, or were you arrested on Long Island? And then they go, okay, now 51% of your license has to be owned by that type of person, and 30% has to be to just one guy who has control. And you're like, all right, so you can't dilute these people out. And then how many people are actually in the state that would qualify for this? And when you have that type of thing, if it is in a limited market, the only thing that happens is lawsuits that last years. Now, if there's no numbers in the MRTA, and so the MRTA is the law that's in New York. And so if the regulator just allows an unlimited number of licenses, similar to Michigan, similar to New Jersey, then it's not so bad. But we have to kind of see how this plays out. The legislative initiative that was playing out in Illinois, I think that was written by like Verano and Cresco. But you have to start somewhere, and then all the ballot initiative states, they're done. I think they've all blown out or changed their rules to almost make it precluding the cannabis ballot initiative that would be coming. Like some states, and I think Florida is one of them, will change their rules of the ballot initiative to make it more difficult to get on the ballot as they see cannabis trying to come toward it. So then they're really kind of back-ended into the legislative initiative. But Illinois, our ballot initiative ability is like this frickin' thin, and other states are like that too.
Appreciate that. Well, to watch how this plays out, you're gonna have to come back to Green Rush Live next time when we bring up the same topic. But in the meantime, Tom, where can people find you at? Where are you at online? Tom Howard, of course, with Collateral Base.
CannabisIndustryLawyer.com is my law blog. And then we just updated our CannabisLegalizationNews.com. So now whenever we post a video on Cannabis Legalization News on YouTube, it gets automatically turned into a blog post. And then, of course, wherever podcasts can be downloaded, you can find the Cannabis Legalization News podcast.
Appreciate you joining us, Tom, as always. And Christopher Smith, where are you at?
Well, I'm in California, but I can be found online, AmericanCannabisReport.com. I have an interview show, American Cannabis Report, that actually also broadcasts from Pro Cannabis Media. So you can find me there on their site as well, and on all the socials, YouTube, etc. Instagram, all across the board. But American Cannabis Report, where I do print and interview content.
Well, and I'm Josh Kincaid. I've been the host while Jimmy ate a 1,000 milligram edible and passed out and no one could wake him up. But don't worry, he's going to be back next week. You can find me at the Talking Hedge or, anywhere that cannabis podcasts are played. But with that, I think we're going to have to roll this one up. So I want to thank my guests, Christopher Smith and Tom Howard. And I want to thank all of y'all. Don't forget to come back next week for Green Rush Live. But with that, we're going to have to roll this one up. Y'all have a great weekend. We're out.
Coming up on Weed Talk News this week, expect the U.S. Senate to take up federal legalization of weed by the end of April. New Mexico's first weekend of adult use sales breaks records for an opening of a new state's market. The city of Philadelphia has reversed its medical marijuana policy, but that's Philadelphia, Mississippi. Who knew? Washington State strikes out the M word and replaces it with the word cannabis in all state laws. And will other states follow now? And finally, cows chill out on hemp in their food. So says a federally funded study. Wait, federal funding for cannabis hemp research? Only in America on We Talk News next. Pro Cannabis Media original content is supported by Salient Systems, your trusted name in video surveillance for the cannabis industry, and by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, CPA services for the cannabis industry, and by stylighting.shop. Log on today to get your grow kit.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto reporting for Pro Cannabis Media. The state of federal cannabis in the United States is now in the hands of the Senate. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he and his colleagues are reaching out to Republican senators to see what they want included in a bill to federally legalize marijuana, which Schumer plans to introduce later this month. Simultaneously, the MORE Act just passed the House and now awaits discussion in the Senate as well. So between the two separate bills, we should expect to see some kind of discussion about cannabis on the Senate floor by the end of April. But at the same time, the White House won't say for sure what its stance is. This week, Press Secretary Jen Psaki was unable to say whether the president supports the MORE Act, only telling reporters that Biden, quote, agrees that we need to rethink our approach to cannabis. So let's take a closer look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. this week. Here's Vote Pro Podcast's Phil Adams.
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC Report. The Drug Enforcement Administration has acknowledged that cannabis seeds are considered legal hemp and therefore not controlled under Schedule 1. Responding to an inquiry from Shane Pennington, an attorney at Vicente Sederberg LLP, the DEA affirmed that since the enactment of the 2018 Farm Bill, any parts of the cannabis plant that don't exceed 0.3% THC are excluded from the Controlled Substances Act. Pennington, who has a record of litigation against the DEA on an array of drug policy issues, said, quote, "I'm hopeful this will clear up a lot of confusion in this area of the law." Lawmakers in the District of Columbia voted down a measure this week that would have made it easier for DC residents to purchase cannabis legally. Sponsored by District Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, the bill was designed to allow DC residents 21 and older to self-identify as medical cannabis patients without requiring a doctor's authorization. The bill would also crack down on the practice of gifting cannabis to customers who buy other products and services as a way of circumventing the ban on adult use cannabis sales. In 2014, a rider was added to the federal appropriations bill that banned legal cannabis sales in DC. That rider has been renewed every year since then. $3.7 billion in cannabis sales tax revenues was collected last year in states where adult use is legal. That represents a 34% increase from 2020. That's according to a report put out this week by the Marijuana Policy Project. The report is an addendum to one released in January, which looked at total recreational use cannabis sales tax revenues from all legal states since 2014. Over that period, the MPP estimates a total of $11.2 billion has been collected. MPP's president and CEO, Toy Hutchinson, called these figures, quote, "further evidence that ending cannabis prohibition offers tremendous financial benefits for state governments." That's the Weed Talk News this week from DC. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
In your state to state roundup, New Mexico residents welcomed legal weed with open arms during the first weekend of the open recreational market. Adult use sales surpassed $4.5 million last weekend, with more than half of those sales happening in one day, setting a new record for a state's opening market weekend. In Delaware, efforts for adult use legalization may be back in the works. A legalization bill fell narrowly short on the House floor last month, but the representative who crafted the bill has a new two-track approach to first legalize possession and then pass separate legislation to regulate cannabis sales. New tentative support for the latter measure from the House Speaker could potentially push things along. And the city of Philadelphia has opted out of medical marijuana. That's Philadelphia, Mississippi, though. The state approved a medical marijuana measure in January, a year after voters approved an initiative that was struck down by the state Supreme Court. But this week, the city's leaders decided overwhelmingly to opt out of participating in the legal medical market. So sticking with the South, let's check in with Heather Allman for this week's Florida Report.
It's time for the weekly Florida Report from Weed Talk News. I'm Heather Allman with Cannabis Law Report. Florida may see a 420 miracle this year as Miami's first medical cannabis dispensary might finally be allowed to open. In the 6 years since the Sunshine State legalized medical cannabis, not a single dispensary has opened within the Miami city limits. For years, eligible patients have been prescribed a medical marijuana card from any number of doctors in the city, despite having to go to another municipality to fill that recommendation. And believe me, it is not from a lack of entrepreneurial interest, but a conflict that dates back to 2019 about whether the state's constitutional amendment legalizing medical cannabis trumps the federal ban on cannabis. The city denied California entrepreneur Romy Chaudhary the certificate of use permit he needed to open. And for the past 3 years, two of his entities have been embroiled in a legal dispute with the city, which cites that cannabis's listing as a Schedule I controlled substance under the federal CSA is justification for denying those permits. In 2021, the city's Volunteer Planning and Zoning Appeals Board voted in favor of Chaudhary and overturned the city's decision, because no part of the city code specifically bans or limits dispensaries, which is a state requirement before it can be enforced. Miami zoning director appealed the board's finding, and the appeal was put on hold and put in federal court. The federal court, however, promptly kicked it back down to the county level last fall, ruling the city had failed to act under the provisions of Florida law by, you guessed it, not writing a specific ordinance that regulates or bans medical cannabis dispensaries. This is the crux of the issue at its core. But finally, things might change next week when this dispute between Cannabis and the city comes to a head at the Miami Commission's next regularly scheduled meeting on April 14th, only 6 days before the 420 celebrations commence. Let's hope Miami patients can indeed celebrate this cannabis holiday within their own city limits. In other news, we saw 2 major moves from Trulieve this week. Over the weekend, they became the first cannabis MSO to enter the metaverse with their 420 for All NFT collection. It's currently being sold on the OpenSea marketplace, and the initial offerings began April 2nd, exactly 420 hours prior to April 20th, the nationally recognized cannabis holiday. Each NFT includes an illustrated hand raised supporting cannabis accessibility and social justice, with each hand holding a different cannabis product, celebrating the diverse cannabis community and culture. All proceeds from the 4.20 for All NFT collection will be donated to the Last Prisoner Project, who's helping free over 40,000 individuals still in prison for nonviolent cannabis convictions. And speaking of that, our final story is about Trulieve, who also recently announced an exclusive partnership in Florida with Delicioso LLC to become the exclusive producer, retailer, and processor of Delicioso branded products throughout the state, with Flamingo Kush by Delicioso pre-rolls launching on April 15th. Delicioso is a Florida-based cannabis brand founded by Rick and Richard Delici. Richard is one of the longest-serving nonviolent cannabis prisoners in the U.S. history, having served 32 years of a 90-year sentence. So this agreement to legally sell cannabis marks a monumental full-circle moment for him. Like Trulieve, the Delicioso brand is also committed to donating a portion of its sales to nonprofits, including the Last Prisoner Project, an organization who was instrumental in securing Delici's release in December 2020. That's a wrap for the We Talk News Florida Report. With high hopes for Miami, I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report.
In Washington state, a local school district has received more than $250,000 in grant funds for tobacco and cannabis prevention and education over the next 5 years. The funding goes toward educational resources for Hispanic and Latinx students and families regarding cannabis and tobacco prevention. Josh Kincaid has much more from Washington state this week.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Washington lawmakers say it's pejorative and racist to use the term marijuana. Anti-drug activists often use the word marijuana in a negative way, and the media and government officials also turned it against people of color, including Mexican immigrants and jazz musicians. Recently, tipping at restaurants has also been called racist, and gyms have been labeled as fascists. And now, alternatively, some historians are raising concerns about the effort to call marijuana racist. Opposition to the narrative states that the stories about smoking cannabis leading to madness and violence didn't actually originate in the U.S., according to Isaac Campos, a professor of Latin American history who studied cannabis history. Campos goes on to say that the propaganda was first printed in Mexican newspapers, and it was the Mexican government that ended up outlawing the drug first, nearly 20 years before the U.S. did. U.S. media reprinted anti-cannabis stories from the Mexican press, and as immigrants moved north, they carried negative stories about cannabis with them. Regardless of the negative origins, Governor Jay Inslee recently signed a bill striking the word marijuana from the text of all state law. The measure says to use the word cannabis instead. The effort in Washington is part of a national movement to retire the word. Earlier this year, Maine and Virginia also introduced bills about striking the word marijuana from their laws. Let us know in the comments if the words marijuana or stoner strike a nerve with you. But with that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge, reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
A California senator is looking for reform for medical marijuana. The Senate Business and Professions Committee has passed a new bill which would restore voter-created access to medical cannabis across the state by requiring cities to provide consumers access to purchase medicinal cannabis. The bill now heads to the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. And with that, here's Christopher Smith with this week's California Report.
Greetings from the most fabulous left coast. This is the California Roundup for Weed Talk News. A few months ago, legendary California dispensary Harborside announced that it was merging with dispensary Urban Leaf and grower manufacturer Loudpack to form a new entity called State House. So there have been several high-profile mergers and or acquisitions in the U.S. and Canadian markets over the last few years, and this one let us know that California was now experiencing its own period of consolidation. Now, Urban Leaf's major competitor in the San Diego area, called March and Ash, has announced it's combining with Santa Rosa-based manufacturer Cannacraft to form Groundwork Holding, Inc. Cannacraft is a company with roots in the legacy market and produces Farmer and the Felon brand, which benefits the Last Prisoner Project, among others. You'll hear a lot about the $4 billion in cannabis tax revenues that companies allegedly trucked to various tax collection agencies in cash, of course, because the man in Washington doesn't want to allow normal banking activities for cannabis companies. The man in Washington doesn't see a problem with billions of dollars in cash moving around our communities, which most people would consider a public safety problem. But I digress. What too few people seem to ask is, what's all that cannabis tax money doing for the American people? Well, here's a little bitty taste of the potential for all of our hard-earned cash. From Orange County, California, the tax money that Santa Ana officials collect from sales at licensed cannabis businesses citywide has funded the $884,000 upgrade of Santa Ana's main public library, now featuring a children's patio with a play structure and outdoor reading areas. And guess what? There's an additional $2.7 million left to be used, along with a new policy that dictates that no less than 50% of the cannabis fund goes to youth services every year. And finally, if you want to rent a new Airbnb for a weekend or perhaps a wedding, you can now rent Sonoma Hills Farm, an idyllic Northern California farmstead that produces world-class cannabis alongside a spacious culinary garden using regenerative farming practices. Guests will not have access to the cannabis grown on the farm, but will have access to hemp, the low-THC cousin of marijuana, and will also learn about regenerative farming practices, which are like organic farming times 10, what some say is the only way to protect our precious farmland and topsoil. This is an interesting potential getaway that has real appeal. According to Forbes, a 2020 report found that 29% of all active leisure travelers and 18% of all Americans want to do cannabis-related activities on vacation. And I'm Christopher Smith, publisher of the American Cannabis Report, bringing you great news about a big new company, a buffed-out library and millions of dollars for kids, and a regenerative farm Airbnb, all because of California cannabis. For Weed Talk News.
The lines between legal and illicit cannabis markets in Michigan apparently aren't so clear. It seems state-regulated legal companies are beginning to blur the lines when it comes to gifting cannabis products and holding marketplace events that are historically illegal. With much more, here's Michigan Normal Executive Director, Rick Thompson.
Good day, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. This week, a new program was launched at the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. Monthly reports summarizing the enforcement actions taken by the agency against licensed cannabis companies are now being published. And a quick look at March's summary reveals most of the fines were issued for incorrectly displaying product by using non-conforming package types. CCG Holdings from Baldwin received 2 fines of $2,000 each. Stateside Wellness was also hit with a $2,000 fine for improperly labeling cannabis products in the store. And True North Collective was hit with a pair of $250 fines for discharging reverse osmosis backwash into a Great Lakes watershed, namely a marsh connected to the Grand River. Well, that all seems like small stuff compared to Thrive Enterprises fines from last month, a total of $250,000 to be paid for allegedly trying to trick the MRA into allowing a transfer of license from one party to another. Pharmaco last month was ordered to get rid of several owners who are banned for life from owning cannabis entities in Michigan and were forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars in penalties for delivering cannabis to liquor stores and non-medical cannabis consumers in Detroit. Speaking of Detroit, they finally passed their new adult use cannabis business ordinance in the Motor City. There are 2 types of licenses contained in the new rules: limited license types and unlimited license types. Unlimited license businesses include cultivation and testing and transport companies. Limited license types include social consumption lounges, micro businesses, and cannabis retailers. Legal challenges are expected against the limited license type category, just as the previous ordinance was challenged in court and lost. But this ordinance contains severability, meaning if courts determine that the scoring method used for cannabis retailers is found unconstitutional, the unlimited license types will still be okay to operate. Now, that's a huge advantage for those customers like Chris Weber and Al Harrington, who are currently cultivating or have broken ground on new construction for mega cannabis farms in the D. During Tuesday's hearing of City Council, many residents expressed feelings that the city would be overrun by cannabis companies whose opportunities for growth were expanded by council, but whose responsibility for financial assistance to the city's struggling nonprofits has been diminished by that very same council. Unlimited adult use license types will begin the application process on April 20, but the limited licenses will take some time beyond that date before the city is ready to accept those applications. Now, final story. This past weekend was Hash Bash weekend in Ann Arbor. There were 4 large events: the bash itself, the 20-year-old Monroe Street Fair, the Hash Bash Cup, and the Great Lakes Expungement Network's Treasure Map Adventure. All 4 events went off quite well, despite a 1-hour delay in starting the Hash Bash due to an electrical failure, which was corrected by the University of Michigan's campus staff. Featured at the bash this year was the state's Attorney General, Dana Nessel, who directed her comments at the growth of the state's regulated marketplace and the need to protect medical cannabis patients from discrimination. This year's Monroe Street Fair was expanded to include Tappan Avenue. The Hash Bash Cup offered national music acts and the state's most respected cannabis competition. And the Treasure Map contest found several hundred people visiting a dozen different Ann Arbor cannabis-friendly locations to collect stamps and complete their map. Winners in that contest were drawn randomly this week during the Jazz Cabbage Cafe television show, which can be seen on Pro Cannabis Media's Roku channel. All in all, a fantastic weekend of fun and cannabis consumption in the nation's de facto cannabis capital, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
On the other end of the country, lawmakers in Massachusetts are also weighing reform options. A formal session will address 33 filed amendments from senators ranging from technical contract tweaks to potency limits and advertising restrictions. So let's check in with Ron Marshalsea with more of this week's Massachusetts Report.
I'm Ron Marshalsea with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. The mayor of West Springfield wants to lift the ban on the sale of recreational marijuana in his community. The mayor tried this in 2018, but he only had one city councilor vote yes to allowing recreational marijuana shops in West Springfield. This time, he has 3 co-sponsors. Mayor Reichelt hopes the cannabis ban comes to a vote by July. Cannabis-infused seltzer Levia will be bringing a new seasonal flavor, Mellow Mule, to Massachusetts shelves. With 420 fast approaching, the Levia team decided to embrace the cannabis holiday with a gingery lime twist. Matt Melander, co-founder of Levia, was quoted as saying, "We've gotten a great reception from our previous cranberry lime, pomegranate punch, and orange blossom cans, and look forward to continuing to deliver fun and innovative experiences." This ginger and lime combination is supposed to leave customers feeling refreshed, focused, and bubbly. And finally, Trulieve will be having a grand opening for their new Framingham location this Saturday, April 9th. The grand opening will include executive meet and greets, live brand activations, giveaways, food trucks, all-day in-store promotional offers, and more. Also, Trulieve is partnering with Dr. Marion McNabb's team at the Cannabis Center of Excellence to support the nonprofit's ongoing medical cannabis research. That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report. For Weed Talk News, I'm Ron Marshalsea.
Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
New Jersey is looking to get more people involved in the budding business of legal weed. This week, Stockton University hosted the state's largest legal weed and networking event, which also offered on-site expungement of records and legal advice. Jill Goldsberry has much more from New Jersey this week.
I'm Jill Goldsberry with this week's New Jersey report for Weed Talk News. In Somerset County, they're on track to open their very first medical marijuana dispensary amid the mixed reaction from many local residents. Middle Valley Partners CEO, cannabis advocate, and attorney Sarah Trent will appear before the planning board on April 27th to propose a dispensary on Route 202. Middle Valley Partners received their approval from the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission back in December to open the first dispensary. In other news in and around New Jersey, the New Jersey townsfolk are attempting to block legal cannabis sales. When the 2020 New Jersey referendum making recreational cannabis sales legal was voted on, they weren't expecting this. In picturesque Princeton, 75% of the town's residents voted in favor of legal weed sales. However, when the Princeton's Cannabis Task Force recommended opening 3 dispensaries in the town, that's only 18 square miles, more than 50 people sounded off for over 4 hours. And most of those who spoke did not want weed anywhere nearby their town. Towns like Pennington, Livingston, and Hoboken, where legal marijuana won wide voter support, but where local officials banned cannabis businesses anyway. Town leaders say they were motivated more by caution rather than residents' complaints. Officials like Hoboken Councilman Mike Russo expressed his concern for the situation and called the body's move to limit weed shops' retail outlets as backtracking. You can't say you're for cannabis and turn around and say you don't want it here, said Russo. At Pro Cannabis Media, we agree with that. I'm Jill Goldsberry, and this is the New Jersey Report for Weed Talk News.
And for the rest of this week's Weed Talk News, here's Pro Cannabis Media founder, Jimmy Young.
Thanks, Elena. Great working with you. I'll take it from here. So do you remember a few weeks ago on Weed Talk News, we told you how Mike Tyson's new edible line was in the shape of a human ear? Of course, that ear had a bite taken out of it, but it still looked like a human ear. That is a big no-no in Colorado. According to the cannabis laws in Colorado, medical cannabis edibles cannot be shaped like humans or human body parts. So Mike's Bites, which are selling like hotcakes in California, will be turned into the shape of a letter T for Tyson, just in Colorado. Now it's time for the latest in the world of big cannabis business and the publicly traded companies. Here's the Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt.
This is the business update for Weed Talk News from the Green Market Report. New Mexico is now the 18th state to legalize the sale of adult use cannabis, and those sales began last Friday. The state reportedly sold $5 million worth of product by the end of the first weekend. Tilray Brands reported third fiscal quarter revenue increased 23% to $152 million, but that fell from the second quarter's revenue of $155 million, and it slightly missed revenue estimates. Now, the company also reported a net income of $52 million. However, this net income improvement was almost entirely through accounting magic that kind of turned falling stock prices into net income. The Green Organic Dutchman reported that in 2021, their revenue rose 146% to $39 million. But the company also reported that they had a net loss for the year of $43.5 million. And more troubling was the company's auditors saying that the accumulated deficit had gotten to $487 million. And so the company remains a going concern. And this has been your business update. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report.
The next state in the legalization battle will be Maryland. This week, House legislators there okayed the addition of a ballot question in the fall elections that will ask about legalization of cannabis for adult use. Now, if it passes, sales are expected to begin in July of 2023. It was 2015 when cannabis was decriminalized in Maryland. And in Baltimore, arrests for cannabis possession and other crimes is way down. Maryland State Attorney stopped prosecuting cannabis crimes in 2020, and in 2022, only one person was arrested so far for carrying 10 milligrams or 1/3 of an ounce. No such problem in Vermont, where the Green Mountain State continues to move forward with their legal adult use market. Here's our Vermont correspondent, Jessie Lynn Dolan, with the latest from her state.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. The Cannabis Control Board met this week to formally adopt Rules 3 and 4. They also reviewed and voted on staff recommendations on licensed pre-qualification applicants. Activists are turning their attention to Bill H548, a piece of supposed cannabis cleanup legislation, which tragically ignores some of the reforms put by the Cannabis Control Board themselves. Folks are now asking the legislator to restore the reforms on THC caps, reform the potency and packaging limits for edibles, and include both a nursery and a limited online retail license. The Vermont Growers Association is hosting a spring seed giveaway in April, raffling off seeds every Monday of the month. April 12th, there's a vote on whether to allow cannabis retail in Essex Junction, and April 13th, there's a revote in Castleton. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
Earlier in Weed Talk News, Elena told you the story about Philadelphia, Mississippi, a small town in that southern state that has banned the new legal medical marijuana initiative. Who knew there was a Philadelphia in Mississippi? I know I didn't, but I knew that our Pennsylvania correspondent, Claudia Post, did. Here's the latest from the Keystone State.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. Last week, the Senate Banking and Insurance Committee voted unanimously to move SB 1167, or the Safe Cannabis Banking Law, out of committee. This includes a 280E provision. Now, what's 280E of the Internal Revenue Code? It prohibits taxpayers who are engaged in the business of trafficking certain controlled substances from deducting typical business expenses. This is a huge win for our industry, so that's great. Now back in Pennsylvania, or as I like to say sometimes in the middle, Pennsyltucky, we have a state senator, Judy Ward, who is an ill-informed civil servant. She expressed concerns about the recent Senate Law and Justice Committee hearings regarding the legalization of recreational marijuana. Erroneously, she believes there are many consequences of legalizing marijuana, such as it being addictive, which can trigger dependency and withdrawal symptoms. I mean, does this woman know that many major teaching hospitals, universities have divisions within them now studying marijuana? The woman needs to read, okay. She also believes it doubles a person's risk for developing an opioid addiction, and it comes with more crime and DUIs. Wake up, Judy, baby. People have been driving high for a lot of years. Marijuana laws in PA are among the most severe in the country, and honestly, I didn't know that, despite the majority of voters supporting legalization and regulated sales. 62% of likely voters in Pennsylvania support the legalization and sale of recreational marijuana. However, under current state law, those found in possession face up to 30 days of imprisonment or a fine of $500 for 30 grams or less. In Philadelphia, however, we decriminalized in 2014, but our city has yet to legalize it. I ask why. Possession of 30 grams or less for personal use comes with a fine of $25, and don't smoke out in public places or you'll get a fine of $100. Being caught with a larger amount can result in arrest and jail time. No kidding. We are criminalizing people. We are wasting taxpayers' dollars by incarcerating people for something that's less harmful than alcohol. That's a wrap from Pennsylvania. I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. So, for Weed Talk News, have a great week.
If you enjoy edibles in Oregon, you should make sure that you check the labels for a lot of reasons. Now, that state is allowing the edibles there to have higher THC potency with some restrictions. The serving size is now doubling from 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams with up to 100 milligrams per package. With the latest of what's going on in the state of Missouri, here's Weed Talk News, Brandon Jones.
Yeah, Jimmy, edibles are really taking off here in the state of Missouri, too. They're really changing the prices, bringing them down. It's a big thing that's happening here in the state of Missouri is a lot of prices are being dropped here just because of more and more dispensaries opening across the state. Some places are getting even $20 eights and $20 gummies, if you can believe that. But if you know me, I'm more of a flower guy. But again, I'm Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. My first story today actually comes out of the St. Louis Dispatch. There was a big rally in Jefferson City, Missouri last Thursday. I was actually got to go hang out and see all the people talking about how we can get more access to cannabis, seeing how we can get it to veterans, how we can get it to low income people, and just figuring out a way to get more access. But the big thing is the Cannabis Freedom Act did pass with a 5-4 vote, but they added a horrible amendment that said minorities and transgender women were not allowed access to the interest-free loans for their businesses, which I don't understand at all. And most people that are behind this act don't either. They kind of think it's basically a little spite to try to get the bill to not pass. But we're still very hopeful that the bill will pass, and we'll try to get that expungement changed or amendment changed as fast as we can before it actually passes the next vote. And my second story is talking about sales. If you can believe it, last month here in the state of Missouri, sales reached over $30 million just for the month. It's up to nearly $1 million a day here in the state of Missouri in cannabis sales. Things are only growing and getting faster here. More dispensaries are open with over 188 already currently acting. So you can get cannabis all over the state, whether in rural areas or in the big cities. So thank goodness Missouri is trying to find a way to get everybody access. Again, I'm Brandon Jones with Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Stay educated and medicated. Have a great week, guys.
So did you hear about Europe's support for cannabis? Well, according to a poll conducted by London-based Hanway, over 50% of Europeans support legalization, and over 30% use it regularly. Now, interestingly, unlike here in the States, Europeans don't want to grow it, they just want to buy it. Here's Stephen Arthur George with our European report for Weed Talk News.
I'm Stephen Arthur George with SAG Advisory Services in Lisbon, Portugal. This is the European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Majority of Europeans support cannabis legalization. This was just reported by Reuters earlier this week, and it poses the question, could Europe move before the United States? It's definitely not clear yet, but we do see some new momentum here in Europe and also now have public support as well. Over in Switzerland, the first cannabis wellness spa has recently opened. It will be CBD only at this time, and they will offer things such as yoga as well as massages. It's most likely a play on future hopes of adult use regulation in Switzerland. Up in the United Kingdom, a large UK media investor is getting into cannabis. Channel 4's investment division has invested in Cannarray, a UK-based medical cannabis and CBD wellness company. This deal will increase their exposure on TV to a company who already has CBD products in over 1,500 retail stores. That's the European Cannabis Report. I'm Stephen Arthur George from SAG Advisory Services reporting for Weed Talk News.
And finally, tonight, we all know that cannabis is still illegal on the federal front, and thanks to the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp is legal. Now, sure enough, a federal grant of over $200,000 was awarded to Kansas State to study the effect of hemp on cows' personality and behavior in their feed. That study was funded by the Department of Agriculture, and the conclusions were released this past week. Sure enough, hemp munching steers spent more time lying down and had lower levels of stress hormones. $200,000 to tell us this? Only in America. That's Weed Talk News for this week. For Elena Pinto and producer Tori Chamberlain, I'm Jimmy Young from Weed Talk News. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
Hi, my name's Tai Chang. I'm the president and founder of Aloha Green Apothecary in Hawaii. We're a vertically integrated medical cannabis company with 3 dispensaries, 1 extraction lab, and 1 cultivation center near the North Shore of Oahu. We have over 150 employees now, and we've been working with Adaptive HR to meet our human resource needs. We're super excited to work with them as we expand, and we've grown at least 2-3 times over the last 2 years. So we look forward to a good relationship with Adaptive, and come visit us in Hawaii anytime. Aloha.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area. Now, with 3 locations in Greater Boston, Cambridge, one and products, Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay 1 initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information. Meet Caduceus Science, the alternative wellness company. You know CBD, but how about CBG, CBN? That's right, Caduceus Science produces a range of full-spectrum products, all lab-tested in small batches to maintain the highest quality of products. CaduceusScience.com. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.